The day dawned soft and silver over King's Landing, as though the sky itself wished to mute its brilliance in deference to the quiet but profound moment unfolding beneath it. The narrow sea lay calm, a vast mirror that caught the hesitant light of early morning and carried it toward the city's battered ramparts. Where once smoke and screams had tainted the air, gulls now swooped in languid arcs, their cries piercing the hush like frail trumpets sounding an unspoken reveille. Sansa Stark stood upon the highest balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, clad in a gown the hue of dusk-touched snow and trimmed with a discreet edge of direwolf gray. Her hair, once the auburn of autumn embers, now tempered by pale streaks earned through hardship, fell in a single heavy braid down her back, the end bound by a silver ring wrought in the shape of interlocking weirwood leaves. Below, the Red Keep's inner curtain yard thrummed with muted activity. Servants fresh-washed and nervously industrious, sworn shields aligning in neat cords of polished steel, maester and scribe comparing lists that fluttered, tugged by an insistent breeze. Every soul within the walls seemed aware they were breathing a hinge between ages, as though the air itself were touched by prophecy. Yet within Sansa there was no exultation, no fevered anticipation of a triumph long delayed. Only the measured thud of her heart, the weight of history perched upon her slender shoulders, and the faint perfume of lemon balm carried from the herb garden below. She let her gaze linger over the courtyard, on the unadorned banners soon to be replaced, on the faces of men and women who had endured dragonfire and tyranny, and she pressed her palm against the cold stone balustrade. Stark tradition counseled iron composure, but she permitted herself one deep breath, drawing in so fully her ribs ached. When she exhaled, it was not a breath released but a vow surrendered to the wind. "I will keep them safe. I will keep them safe." A soft knock came at the door behind her. She did not turn at once, recognizing the cadence. 2 precise taps, a pause, and a final tap. As Serda Van Talhart's, the Northern Knight, loyal to her mother's blood, served now as her sworn shield. He entered with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to shadows and responsibility alike. "Your Grace," he said, voice low. The honorific sounded new, untested, like a cloak freshly tailored, yet not fully broken to the wearer's shape. "They gather in the throne room. Your Grace." She almost flinched, hearing the title once reserved for mad kings and conquering queens now laid at her feet like a crown not yet cooled from the forge. Sansa turned, her face an untroubled lake. "Very good, Sir Davon. Send Miranda to me." He bowed, plate armor whispering, and withdrew. His departure left the room stiller, the air thrumming with possibility. Moments later, Miranda Reed slipped inside, face flushed with the excitement she strove, sometimes successfully, to conceal. A reed-thin woman with luminous moss-green eyes, she bore the pragmatic cunning of her Crannogman lineage. In her hands she cradled a small wooden box carved with leaping trout and running wolf. Miranda knelt. "I thought you might wish to wear this." She opened the box to reveal a simple circlet of silver, its band hammered in the impression of a direwolf's running tracks, small garnets gleaming like hidden eyes. "The goldsmiths offered greater riches, but I remembered what you told me about northern modesty." Sansa took the circlet as one might lift a sleeping infant, gentle, awed, wary of the life bound up in so slight a weight. She regarded her reflection in a small hand mirror Miranda produced. A pale brow, calm blue-gray eyes, lips composed but soft where lines of girlish mirth once lay. She set the circlet upon her head, fingers brushing cool metal. In the mirror's glass she became something at once fierce and fragile, a child of Winterfell cloaked in the mantle of the realm. The sight caught breath in her throat. For a heartbeat she saw not herself, but her mother, Catelyn, standing tall within Riverrun's Godswood, eyes alight with pride and fear when sending her daughters south. The memory flickered and faded, leaving a luminous ache. "Thank you," she said. Miranda rose, eyes shimmering with loyalty stronger than any vow of words. "Will you walk with me?" "Until the end of my days," Miranda murmured. No sigil emblazoned her plain woolen kirtle, yet her devotion marked her more keenly than any heraldry. Together they stepped into the corridor. The castle's halls felt different, still cold with ancient drafts, but no longer heavy with unspoken dread. Servants curtsied or bowed as she passed, and though each gesture carried deference, it was respect rather than fear that colored their eyes. Sansa returned every greeting with a nod, storing each face in the ledger of her mind. She had learned well. A queen's power lay not solely in armies and lords, but in knowing the hopes of the humble and binding them to her cause with earnest regard. At the stairs landing they encountered Tyrion Lannister, now Hand of the Queen. Though he wore no pin this morning, his status required no embellishment. He inclined his head. "All preparations are complete," he said softly. "The lords await your entrance." Tyrion's eyes, one green, one black, studied her with the same measured scrutiny that had once pierced her in those terrible days of false smiles and poisoned courtesies. She met his gaze without trembling. They were, after tempestuous journey, allies bound by shared scars and tempered purpose. He extended an arm. She clasped it. Neither spoke further. Words were too slight to bear the weight of this turning. The doors to the throne room opened at their approach. The space beyond, vast and vaulted, shouldered morning light through high-slitted windows, casting spears of pale gold across the floor's worn flagstones. The Iron Throne itself, scarred, jagged, symbolic in both majesty and madness, loomed at the far end upon a low dais. Yet, it was not the throne that drew Sansa's eyes, but the gathered lords and ladies lining the aisle. Robar Royce with his oaken sternness, Lord Grafton, silver hair neatly curled, Yara Greyjoy standing unbowed in austere black, Lyanna Mormont's cousin Jarell, as fierce as any bear despite her youth. Even Edric Storm stood among them, newly appointed Lord of Storm's End, his Baratheon blood worn lightly but proudly, and in the front rank, Bran the Broken, her brother, king of the Six Kingdoms no more, regarded her with calm that transcended sight. His faint smile warmed her like hearthlight. Trumpets did not blare. Bells did not toll. Instead, a hush that seemed almost wholly descended as she commenced her walk down the aisle. Her footsteps sounded soft, slippered, though each beat echoed across the marrow of memory, of battlefields frozen and scorched, of sisters lost and found, of innocents slaughtered and reclaimed. She did not hurry. She savored each pace, as one might trace bead after bead upon a prayer strand, letting the cadence steady her pulse and settle the tremor coiled in her stomach. At the dais, she paused. There the throne glowered, a monument to the folly of conquest. To take its seat was to pledge one's soul to the capricious hunger of dominion, and Sansa had known too many who perished feeding that hunger. She turned instead to a simple oaken chair placed at the throne's right hand, its arms carved with intertwined direwolf and white hart, a symbol of the union between North and Crown. The Starks had not forged the realm, but they would, she vowed, help heal it. She sank onto the chair. It creaked tolerantly. Maester Samwell Tarly stepped forward, a tome balanced in shaking hands, soft belly straining against his robes, quill perched behind an ear as though he might yet be scribbling when seven hells froze over. "Sansa Stark of House Stark," he began, voice unexpectedly clear. "You are summoned to reign as Queen of the Realm, chosen by Council of Lords and Commons alike. Do you swear to rule with wisdom and mercy, to heed the counsel of the realm's good men and women, and to protect the innocent from tyranny?" Sansa rose again, hands steady at her sides. "I swear it," she said, voice carrying without need for amplification. The words rang not as ceremonial recitation, but as bones-deep conviction. Tarly's fingers brushed a lined parchment containing signatures and seals still drying. "Then, by the authority vested in this council, with the blessing of the Mother and the Father, and witnessed by the North's old gods, I name you Sansa of House Stark, first of her name, Queen of the Realm, Protector of the Realm, Lady of the Seven Gates and Shield of the Innocent." Silence fell, so thick it muffled the sideway as the maester retreated. Sansa inclined her head. Only then did Bran wheel forward, white weirwood pin glimmering on his chest. A hush deeper than the first pooled around them like still water. "You will be a good queen," he whispered. The realm chose well. Better than dragging you from the Greenseer's roots, she teased, though tears threatened her composure. Stay and guide me. I will guide when needed, he replied. But you must walk this path. Justice, not power, drew you here. Let justice shape what follows. With that, he reversed his chair, signaling the ceremony complete. The lords knelt as one. Ironborn, Riverlanders, Dornish, Reach, Vale, Stormlands. Even the few remaining Lannisters, Kevan's grandsons, solemn-eyed, pressed knees to stone. The North, ever stubborn, knelt last, but Sansa smiled to see their heads bow all the same. Only Tyrion remained standing at her side, a half-smile ghosting his face as though he found some private jest in humility. It would have been simple to raise her hands in triumph, to accept accolades. But Sansa spoke instead, voice gentle yet firm. Rise, my lords and ladies. Let us not bow so readily to crowns. I would rather we stand shoulder to shoulder. For the weight of peace is more gladly borne when shared. A murmur like a sigh rippled through the crowd. They rose. Many eyes glistened. Thus was her coronation. A whisper rather than a roar. Fragile as dawnlight yet enduring as the dawn itself. The first court convened that same afternoon in the solar above the king's old council chamber, a smaller sunlit room chosen purposely to foster candid discourse. Long shadows slanted across tapestries depicting the seven-pointed star. The chamber smelled faintly of parchment and beeswax. Around a circular table sat Tyrion, Davin Tallhart, Jorel Mormont, Lord Grafton, Grand Maester Samwell, and Miranda Reed, who served unofficially as both confidant and spymaster, her Cranagman ears attuned to whispers beneath reeds and rafters alike. Sansa occupied no throne here. She sat like any other counselor, though no one mistook her role. She opened the meeting with a single parchment in hand. Our coffers are near empty, she said without preamble. The last war drained what little reserves remained after Cersei's debts. We must rebuild roads, granaries, and trust. And coin is the mortar binding all. Nimn. Tyrion steepled his fingers. The Iron Bank has already inquired whether the realm intends to honor Queen Daenerys' outstanding loan. A murmur of apprehension flicked round the table. Sansa met Tyrion's eyes. We will honor all debts, she said. Even those signed in blood. But we shall renegotiate terms. Send a raven. I will meet their envoys in person. Demonstrate good faith. Secure more lenient interest. In person? Davin frowned. Is that wise? Wisdom sometimes requires risk, she replied. And presence. Let Braavos see the face of Westeros, not a crown of swords, but a woman unafraid to meet obligations openly. Samwell nodded in approval. Transparency builds confidence. And I've begun compiling a ledger of every toll and tax. With Tyrion's help, we might levy graduated tariffs on shipping through the gullet. Lighter for grain, heavier for luxuries. Revenue without starving the poor. Jorel Mormont leaned forward. Poaching persists in Crownland's forests. If we remit steep fines, but offer work maintaining those forests, poachers might choose coin over crime. Dian? Sansa smiled faintly. Justice tempered with opportunity. See to it. Miranda cleared her throat. One more matter. She slid a folded missive towards Sansa Tarei. Lord Gerald Lannister petitions for the release of 2 gold cloaks, held on charges of tormenting smallfolk after the siege. He argues they followed orders. Orders from whom? Sansa asked. From no one. Miranda's gaze darkened. It seems they acted of their own accord, drunken cruelty. Silence settled like frost. Sansa unfolded the missive, scanned the elegant script. She pictured the victims, faceless yet painfully real, scurrying through shattered streets, harried by men drunk on the dregs of power. Her blood cooled. Their trial will proceed. Justice untempered by station. Lord Grafton coughed politely. We risk antagonizing the Westerlands. Gold flows from Casterly Rock still, and blood flows from wounds still unhealed. Sansa replied evenly. Let the realm see that no coin purchases impunity. We will need the Westerland support. but we need the people's trust more. No, Beau? Tyrion's smile widened a fraction. Well reasoned, Your Grace. He tapped a quill to parchment, ink blotting like tiny galaxies. I shall draft the order. The meeting continued long into evening, torches wrought with windle stem iron flickering as dusk surrendered to indigo. They discussed grain shortages in the Reach, Dornish envoys requesting recognition of new Martell leadership, and the disposition of dragon-forged ruins near the Dragon Pit, which Samwell proposed converting into a grand archive. At every juncture Sansa listened, weighed, decided with careful calibration, as though tuning a harp of many strings. She delegated authority, never micromanaging yet, never relinquishing oversight, forging a governance defined by collaboration, rather than decree. When at last the council dispersed, Tyrion lingered. He poured 2 small cups of arbor red from a dusty amphora he had produced apparently from his sleeve. A modest vintage, he said, handing her one. But it will suffice for a toast. Sansa accepted, raising the cup. To rebuilding. To governing, he countered. A far messiah affair. They sipped. The wine was thin but pleasant, tinged with stone fruit. She regarded Tyrion over the rim. You served many rulers. Tell me honestly, do they all begin with such uncertainty? Only the good ones, he said. The monsters never doubt. She nodded, absorbing the truth like a seed laid in fertile soil. Then I shall embrace uncertainty, and temper it with resolve. Tyrion lifted his cup in salute. Days lengthened into weeks. Summer waxed high, gilding the realm in wheat and warring scents, orange blossoms in the Reach, resinous pine along the Trident, sea salt tang that lingered in every breath on Dragonstone. Sansa's rule unfolded not in grand proclamations but in measured steps. Establishing regional councils where small folk could address grievances without traveling to King's Landing. Enacting a bread price cap during lean months. Commissioning roving justiciars empowered to investigate lordly misconduct. She selected them from diverse ranks, a septa with a scholar's mind, a former sellsword seasoned by penury, a maester who loved maps as much as truth. Each carried a sealed writ bearing her stigma of direwolf and dire crown, entwined. Yet governance, she learned, was as much performance as substance. She dined publicly with tanners and harbor workers, listened to their tales of children lost to flux or gangs, then turned and pressed her counsel for improved sewer channels and sanctuary lanterns along shadowed alleys. She knelt beside a charwoman who'd lost a hand to wildfire's last embers, promising to fund an infirmary wing for burn victims. Men called her soft. Others whispered she courted revolt by raising the lowborn's hopes. She bore the barbs with practiced poise, knowing perception was a field, to till as surely as the gold wheat outside Old Town. One crisp morning, ravens brought word of bandit raids along the Gold Road. Displaced sellswards preying on caravans. Sansa convened a small command in the stable's courtyard, the smell of hay and gelding sweat sharp in the air. She stood beside Daven, clad not in silks, but in boiled leather breastplate, lightly adorned with a direwolf etched at the collar. I will go, she declared. Tyrion paled. Your Grace, sending troops suffices. The Queen risks. Troops protect the road, she said. But presence protects hearts. Let the people see the crown stands beside them, sword or spear if need be. My counsel is not unanimous, he warned. Let it disagree, she said. That too is governance. 2 days later, she rode beneath the city gates with a retinue of 20. Among them Miranda, bow slung, Sir Devan, Gerald Mormont in chain and bear-claw necklace, and a half-dozen gold cloaks, untainted by prior scandals. Their passage stirred murmurs through marketplaces, astonished looks at a queen astride a gray courser rather than borne by litter. Children scampered alongside until mothers seized them back, but their smiles lingered like lantern glow. The journey to Hollow Hill was uneventful at first. Sunlight dappled the road through towering chestnut groves, and evening found them encamped by a brook that gurgled over quartz pebbles. Sansa shared simple fare. Salt pork, oatcake, dried cherries, uneasy but resolute. She listened to Miranda recount Crannog tales of neckstones that whispered secrets at dawn. She laughed when Jor-El challenged Daven to archery using pine cones as targets, and Daven grudgingly accepted only to miss by a finger's span. Yet even within camaraderie thrummed vigilance, a hum beneath every heartbeat. Near the ruins of Hayford Keep, they found the first wagon, a scorched skeleton of oak and iron, its cargo crates splintered open, grain spilled like a yellow grave along the ruts. 2 bodies lay face down nearby, throats slit with professional economy. Sansa dismounted, the air thick with the stench of rot and horse blood. She knelt beside a fallen guard, fingers brushing his cooled cheek. A small leather token hung about his neck, a stag rampant. A father from the Stormlands, perhaps, seeking coin for children. She murmured a prayer to both old gods and the Seven. A queen, she reasoned, could ill afford sectarianism when death itself held no preference. Miranda crouched, eyes scanning tracks. They struck swift and hard. No more than 6 bandits, judging by footprints. Hoof marks show they fled east. She pointed to the horizon where hills rolled like slumbering giants. They returned to Hollow Hill at nightfall. Sansa rose. Then we make for Hollow Hill, but not by road. We'll move through the Oak Riviere. Surprise will serve us. Mean. They advanced under mottled shade, hooves muffled by moss and leaf litter. Dusk descended, bruising the sky. Atop Hollow Hill, they found a crumbling watchtower, and below it, the bandit camp. Ragged tents, a smoky fire pit, 3 stout wagons of plundered wheat, and the bandits themselves, 8 not 6, lounging in ill-got finery. One polished a short sword with methodical care. Another tossed bones in a bowl, chanting to nameless luck. Sansa surveyed from the ridge. We parley first, she decided. Tyrion's voice, though absent, echoed in her memory. Words may win what swords cannot. She left armorless Miranda hidden with a drawn bow. The others descended openly. The bandits sprang to arms at their approach. The leader, a gaunt woman with a scar etched from brow to chin, stepped forward. State your business, she hissed, voice rough as gravel. I'm Sansa Stark, your queen, Sansa answered, removing her helm. Her hair caught moonlight, a slip of red gold steel. Gasps rippled. The leader sneered. Queen? Thrones are forged of blood. We drink the dregs you spill. Her eyes flicked to the wagons. We own what we take. Leave with your lives. Sansa's voice did not waver. You steal grain meant for starving small folk. Surrender the wagons and receive clemency. Resist and face stark judgment. Laughter greeted her offer. A bandit loosed an arrow, grazing Daven's pauldron. In that heartbeat, as men lunged and swords sang, Sansa tasted the bitter tang of inevitability. She drew her dagger, the blade once gifted by Arya, and flanked Jor-El. Even as Davan's longsword met the leader's scimitar in ringing fury, Sansa parried a slash from a brute twice her size, pivoted, and drove her dagger into the man's thigh, dropping him with a howl. She had studied the blade under her sister's tutelage. Do not seek glory, seek survival. The skirmish lasted fewer than 10 breaths, but spilled more blood than she'd wished. 3 bandits fell before they yielded. The leader, kneeling, spat blood and defiance. Hang me, she panted. No queen spares wolves who prey on sheep. Sansa met her gaze. Perhaps, she said softly, but I will spare wolves who learn to guard the flock. She gestured to the bound prisoners. Swear fealty to the realm, and you will serve rebuilding efforts under watch. Refuse, and justice is swift. The leader's eyes flickered, hope wrestling pride. Finally she bowed her head. I will serve. So the wagons returned, grain intact. The bandits, now prisoners, marched behind, their chains more symbolic than harsh. Rumors of the queen who fought alongside her guard spread along the gold road like wind in barley. Back in King's Landing, Sansa received news of the Iron Bank's response. 3 senior envoys would arrive come fortnight, intrigued by her personal guarantee. She prepared by poring over ledgers late into night, cross-referencing ship manifests and port levies until columns of figures blurred. Miranda brought honeyed tea and insisted she rest. Sansa smiled tired thanks, but her mind churned. She saw not numbers but lives. Fishermen whose nets tore on hidden flotsam, widows paying taxes in eggs and sorrow, children toiling in tanneries because coins paid in blood seldom stretched far. When at last she slept, dreams came, not of thrones, but of Winterfell's godswood blanketed in snow, the heart tree's red leaves drifting like embers. In the dream she walked barefoot, the snow neither cold nor wet, following a path of paw prints that glowed faint crimson. They led to the heart tree, where her mother stood in a gown of river blue hair, frosted with stars. Catelyn reached out, palm warm. "Remember who you are," she whispered, voice like water over stone. "And remember who they are, each child of this realm." Sansa woke with tears drying cool upon her cheeks. The envoys arrived aboard a sleek Braavosi cog, its hull black as mirror-polished midnight. Sansa greeted them at the harbor, not in the Red Keep's grandeur but upon the dock itself, gulls circling overhead, seawater spraying fine mist. The envoys, 3 solemn men in purple robes, seemed taken aback, yet they bowed. "Queen Sansa," intoned the eldest. "Archivist Vero, you honor us." "I honor my debts," she replied. "Walk with me." She guided them through Fishmonger's Square, where vendors peddled oysters and river carp. Botched. The smells were pungent, the shouts lively. Children wove between barrels. The envoys kept pace, robes brushing muddy boards. Sansa pointed out newly repaired tenements, each bearing a whitewashed plaque indicating crown-funded restoration. "Orley's ruins," she said. "I cannot erase scars, but I can foster healing. Coin alone cannot accomplish this, but coin guided by conscience can." In the small sept of dripping gate, she knelt beside an elderly woman lighting votive candles for sons lost in both sides of the war. Sansa pressed a silver stag into the woman's hand and murmured a blessing. The envoys watched, expressions unreadable. Seated later within an airy chamber overlooking Blackwater Bay, they began negotiations. Tyrion opened with a frank admission. The crown could not satisfy full debt immediately, but proposed staged repayments indexed to grain yields and port revenue. In return, the Iron Bank would lower interest and reinvest part of owed sums into Westerosi infrastructure, reaping dividends in future tariffs. Vero's brow twitched, a Braavosi sign of interest. Hours slid by, parchment filled with annotations. By sunset they reached accord. A 10-year plan pairing fiscal responsibility with humanitarian projects, overseen jointly by Crown accountants and Braavosi auditors. As quills were set down, Vero inclined his head. "Queen Sansa, consider the Iron Bank an ally. Consider the realm a partner," she returned. Seasons turned. Autumn's breath tinged leaves gold. The realm, though still bruised, began to hum with renewed purpose. Trade flourished as repairs on the King's Road encouraged caravans. The Night's Watch, replenished with volunteers granted fresh purpose as border rangers, sent word of reduced wildling raids thanks to fair trade pacts brokered by Queen Sansa's envoys. In the Reach, orphan grain lenders offered seedlings and plows on credit, inspired by Crown-sponsored mutual aid. But peace, like glass, reflects beauty even as it risks shattering. In the Vale, whispers arose that the Queen's lenience toward former rebels coddled treason. In Dorne, some princes balked at tariff standardization. And in the Westerlands, Lord Gerald Lannister nurtured quiet resentment after the conviction of his gold cloaks. One evening, as first frost silvered rooftops, Tyrion delivered a sealed raven message to Sansa's solar. She recognized the crimson wax of Casterly Rock. Within, Lord Gerald's script, polished yet cold, demanded autonomy over Western tax policy and threatened to withhold ore shipments if Crown oversight persisted. Sansa folded the parchment calmly. "Send word that I will visit Casterly Rock within the month. Let us speak face to face." "Face to face," Tyrion echoed, lips thinning. "Your Grace, take caution. My cousin maneuvers behind gold-veined walls." "All the more reason light must enter," she said. "Invite him to parley at Golden Tooth Keep, neutral ground." Tyrion sighed. "You wield diplomacy as others wield blades." "Blades break," she said. "Iron forges yet also rusts. Words may shape destiny longer." Journeys under autumn moons have their own peculiar hush. En route to Golden Tooth, Sansa's entourage passed vineyards stripped bare, their vines asleep beneath russet leaves. She traveled with a larger retinue this time, 30 seasoned guards in Samwell, who insisted on cataloging Riverbridge masonry for his nascent archive. Along the way she paused in hamlets to hear supplicants, gifting coin for school roofs and settling feuds over grazing rights. Word of her fairness preceded her like sunrise. At Golden Tooth Keep, banners of Lannister crimson and stark grey flanked the gatehouse. Inside the great hall, Lord Gerald awaited, flanked by bannermen whose layered silks failed to soften hard stares. Gerald himself bore the Lannister hallmark. Golden hair, green eyes, but his features were sharper than Jaime's bygone charisma, his smile more measured. "Queen Sansa," he greeted. "An honor." She nodded, neither warm nor distant. "Lord Gerald, shall we talk?" They retired to a private solar overlooking rolling hills. Wine was poured, Rick read from Lannisport reserves, and platters of cheese and dried figs set between them. Gerald opened. "The West bears heavy burdens, rebuilding mines collapsed in dragon rain. Your taxes, though well-intended, threaten livelihoods. Nandarile, livelihoods crumble when justice falters." Sansa replied, "I tax fairly, progressively. Your poorest miners pay little. The great houses pay more. An affront to centuries," he said mildly. "Lineage merits respect." "Respect? Yes. Immunity, no." Their exchange slipped between cordiality and tension, like a dance across thin ice. At length, Gerald's mask cracked. "You convict my men for drunken rowdiness, yet spare bandits. Is this northern justice?" "I spared bandits who repented and now built roads," she said. "Your men abused civilians under color of law. Regret without accountability is empty as an unstrung harp." Gerald's cheeks flushed. "We will not be judged by a Stark enthroned through happenstance." "Happenstance?" Her voice iced. "My crown was forged in fire and blood unknown to you. I have known captivity, abuse, betrayal, yet I choose mercy. Do not mistake compassion for frailty." Silence. Gerald inhaled. Slow. "What do you propose?" "An audit of ore shipments, joint oversight by your treasurers and crown accountants. In exchange, tariffs on smelted ingots will be reduced for 5 years, easing your reconstruction. Fair taxation remains. Abuse will be prosecuted." He considered. Outside, wind rattled shutter hinges like distant drums. Finally he extended a hand. "Very well." She took it. No triumph coursed through her veins, only measured relief. Another stone set in the foundation. One by one she would lay them. Winter approached, timid at first. Frost-crusted grasses, breath plumes at dawn. In King's Landing the small folk donned thicker cloaks, yet the markets bustled still. One morning, Sansa stood upon the ramparts watching ragpickers sift litter for salvage. She marveled at their resilience. A memory rose of Arya running in boyish glee through butcher stalls long ago. That girl, forged by hardship into silent steel, now roamed somewhere beyond seas, her shadows dancing across Sansa's dreams. Footsteps approached. "Davendot. Your Grace, the Dornish delegation arrives. Prince Corys Nimeros requests audience." She nodded, turning from the city. "Let them be shown to the solar. I will join presently." "Nee." The prince proved cordial but shrewd, pressing for reduced tribute, citing long-standing independence. Sansa listened, offered compromise, a phased plan linking tribute to caravan toll reductions. By meeting's end, Corys feigned disappointment but accepted outwardly, though his eyes promised future chess moves. Sansa filed that glint away. Governing, she mused, was perpetual vigilance. As year's end neared, Sansa visited the orphan infirmary, now nearly complete, outside Fleabottom. Candlelight glimmered in mullioned windows. Inside, the scent of fresh lime wash and medicinal herbs mingled. Cots lined the ward, each with quilts embroidered by noble ladies who had answered her call for charity. A young boy, no more than 6, sat on one cot clutching a carved direwolf toy. He peered up with solemn wonder as she approached. "Is that yours?" she asked gently. He nodded, but his voice was a whisper. "The lady gave it." A healer indicated Miranda, who stood nearby, cheeks pink. Sansa knelt, smoothing blanket corners. "What is your name?" "Benjen," he murmured. "Benjen?" she repeated, tasting the weight. "This place will keep you safe." His lower lip quivered. "Safe from bad men?" She glanced at Miranda. The healer turned away, eyes bright. Sansa placed a hand over Benjen's. "I will not promise no bad men exist, but I promise they will not decide your fate. You will." He frowned, digesting. Then he smiled, a shy dawn of hope. Sansa rose, throat tight. Outside, snowflakes began to drift, thin and tentative. That night, dragonstone fireplaces roared within the Red Keep, but Sansa sought solitude in the Ravenry Tower's open turret. Snowflakes melted on her lashes. Below, the city lights flickered like a galaxy cast across stone valleys, each spark a life reawakening. She inhaled the night's chill, letting it scour her lungs. Justice was a path without end. She understood. Each victory merely paved the way for new trials. But she felt no dread, only the quiet certainty that, despite failings she would surely make, she would meet each dawn with open eyes and steady heart. In the hush, she spoke into the wind, though no one but perhaps the old gods might hear. "I am Sansa Stark, Queen of the Realm. Let this rain be the shelter my father dreamed, the justice my mother bled for, the future my siblings deserve. Let our people stand unbowed, for they have knelt too long to cruelty." Then the wind carried her vow across rooftops, over markets, through alleys, slipping beneath shutters to rest upon sleeping brows. Snowflakes followed, gentling the stone. And though the night was deep and the world vast, in that moment, a quiet warmth spread, a seed of faith taking root in winter soil. Thus, beneath the silver hush of falling snow, the reign of Queen Sansa, the just began its slow, steadfast blossom. Petal by petal, judgment by mercy. Forging in silence what swords and fire never could. A realm that at last dreamed of peace. A brittle frost still lacquered the ramparts when Sansa stepped into the first tender glow of dawn. Lamps guttered low along the battlements, their orange tongues shrinking before the pale certainty of morning. In the hush that lingers between moon's last watch and sun's first trumpet, she often came here to breathe, to feel stone under palm, and watch the city stir like a sleepy child beneath patchwork blankets of rooftops. Far below, the harbor's tide coaxed slow groans from salt-eaten pilings. Gulls already argued over scraps that had yet to be tossed. The scent was briny, shot through with distant smoke, and, faint but real, the sweetness of rising bread from the ovens at Street of Flower. She closed her eyes. It was easier to hear the heartbeat of the realm when she let the bustle blur into rhythm. Wheel creak, horse snort, gull shriek, hammer clang, each a note in the living chord she served. When she opened them again, Sir Devan waited a careful pace behind, cloak drawn tight against cold. "Raven arrived from the west an hour past," he said, voice kept low so as not to disturb the hush she cherished. "Urgent, the rookery claims." Sansa accepted the tube, wax impressed with a badger rampant. Lord Tados of Silverhill. She broke the seal and scanned the parchment. Bandit raids spreading beyond the Gold Road, this time striking granaries stocked by the Crown's own caravans. 3 dead guards, 2 kidnapped millers. A demand scrawled on barn doors. Bread for the hungry, steel for the greedy. Some new banner of defiance, or the old garbed anew. She folded the message. "Assemble the small council within the hour," she said. Davin bowed and departed. Sansa lingered only a moment longer, tracing the horizon where dawn's lilac was deepening toward rose. She let the sight steal her before turning to duty. In the council chamber, logs snapped in the hearth, sending sparks up a stone chimney blackened by decades of intrigue. Tyrion was already seated, hair tousled and ink smudging the crook of his thumb. He rose before dawn more often than she, relishing those quiet hours when wine was replaced by parchment and the world's chatter stood briefly muted. Jorel Mormont leaned against the mantel, arms crossed, expression flat with contained ire. Miranda occupied her usual stool near the casement, hood half drawn, eyes flicking like minnows through light. Grandmaster Samuel busied himself arranging ledgers, cheeks flushed from the climb. Sansa took her place. "Silverhill reports fresh raids," she announced without ceremony, passing the parchment to Tyrion. "Same pattern. Small, precise strikes. But the ringleaders sign themselves bread for the hungry." Tyrion studied the parchment, then looked up. "A name that courts sympathy. Bandits once swore by the Brotherhood without banners. This lot chooses rhetoric nearer to small folk hearts. Desperation will dress itself in idealism," Jorel muttered. "But kidnapping millers? That's leverage, not justice." "And shall be." Samuel cleared his throat. "Food stores are ample overall, yet not everywhere. The first snows cut some villages off sooner than expected. If these bandits truly feed the hungry, they may be hailed as saviors in the hills." "Robbery by popular acclaim," Tyrion sighed. "A Westerosi pastime." Sansa tapped knuckles to tabletop. "We answer causes, not merely symptoms. Dispatch relief wagons to the outlying hamlets Lord Tytos names. Grain and salt beef." She met Jorel's eye. "You'll escort them?" Jorel nodded. "I'll take 40 guards and a healer." "Not 40. Sansa shook her head. "Twice that, but half in plain cloaks. A show of strength coupled with approachability. And hold open assemblies at each stop. Listen before lecturing." Miranda's lips quirked. "Bread for hearts, ears for minds. Very well." Sansa turned to Tyrion. "Meanwhile, learn who funds this bread banner. Stolen grain alone cannot bribe local scouts nor buy their silence." She paused. "And ask Lord Gerald quietly how many Sellswords left his service these past 6 moons. That will raise his hackles," Tyrion warned. But the ghost of a grin tugged his mouth. "Which I relish. Consider it done." Samuel adjusted silver links. "If I may. The Citadel maintains weather sensors predicting a harsher winter's tale. We might stock crown grain granaries at Gulltown and Maidenpool now. At lower cost than midwinter rates." "Approved," Sansa said. "Draw from Iron Bank reconstruction credits." All nodded, quills scratching as Samuel noted decisions. 5 years earlier, she would have been breathless at each verdict. Now each felt merely necessary. A brick laid. A candle lit. Still, she refused to let routine breed complacency. The realm could slip through cracks no less readily than water through stone. The meeting dispersed by mid-morning. But Tyrion lagged, waiting until the rush of attendance ebbed. "There's another matter," he said softly, producing a smaller parchment. "From Bravos, Archivist Vero sends compliments on prompt payments and inquires whether a certain royal decree might yield further partnership." Sansa accepted the note. The Iron Bank wished exclusive rights to ensure Westerosi merchant vessels sailing the Jade Sea, in exchange offering low-interest credit for shipbuilding at Shipbreaker Bay. She considered. Exclusive rights bred monopoly, but cheaper credit spurred commerce. Balance again. Let the master of ships draft a limited charter, term of 6 years, reviewable by joint council thereafter, she decided. Fair arbitration in any disputes. Tyrion dipped his head. "I suspected as much. I'll pen the response before luncheon." She smiled faintly. "And pen it in under Valerian, if you want to fluster their scribe." "Oh, I intend to fluster many scribes before winter's end," he assured her, eyes twinkling. When he left, Sansa allowed herself a moment by the window. Below, the courtyard swarmed. Pages hauling pikes to the armory, stable hands sending hoofburs, seamstresses airing tapestries woven new in the reach. She felt the life of it hum against her skin. Fragile, precious, unrelenting. A knock. Miranda slipped in. "I've news from Bravos that may interest you more than ship charters." She handed over a thin scrap, a merchant manifest noting the Summer Child, a swift galley, had docked in Bravos after months beyond the Sunset Sea. Among passengers, Arya Stark, under the alias No One. Sansa's heart lurched, not with alarm but with a fierce, blooming warmth. She traced the letters as though they might vanish. "She lives," she whispered. "She thrives according to Doc Talk," Miranda said, voice softening. "Rumor says she wrested a pirate captain's own blade in single combat." Sansa pictured Arya, smaller in childhood memory, fearless grin, eyes pale as iced sap. "Send ravens," Sansa said. "An invitation, not a summons. Let her know she's welcome, always, should her road curve homeward." Miranda inclined her head. "She may ignore it." "She may," Sansa agreed. "But even a wolf ranging far remembers the call of pack." When Miranda departed, she read the name again. "No one," and smiled. Names wielded power, but Arya had learned mastery over self that transcended labels. Sansa envied and admired her in equal measure. Afternoon brought a quieter chamber. The needlework hall repurposed since the war into a refuge where widows spun linens for hospitals. Sansa often visited unannounced, taking a seat by a window to stitch. The women accepted her presence without fuss, though one or two still flustered at calling her Your Grace. Today she embroidered along a strip, destined for a baby blanket. Tiny direwolves gamboling among snowflakes. The needle's rhythm soothed, each pierce and pull a tacit chant of patience. An elderly woman across from her, Marla Stone, spoke in measured cadence, while her fingers danced through wool. "Never thought I'd live to see a queen sew for foundlings," she remarked. "My man told tales of good queens, but they oft ended with beheadings." Sansa smiled ruefully. "Let's hope the stories shift." "Stories shift when people shift 'em," Marla said. "Steel turns quicker than tongue sometimes." Sansa nodded, thinking of bread for the hungry, of bandits cloaking blades beneath righteousness. "We must give tongues fair cause to sing," she said. Before sunset she walked the length of the newly rebuilt Sunset Boulevard, where small merchants sold candles and scents she'd never known. Pine needle citrus, almond spice, honey oak matured in smoke. Children darted between carts, laughing, while a trio of septas offered warm broth to the infirm for a single copper. She paused to sample broth. Savory, laced with onion, and paid double, instructing the septa to keep the change for marrow bones. Later she bought a candle whose fragrance evoked God's wood hush, moss, snow, faint resin. She returned to Maegor's holdfast as dusk purpled the sky. A hush had settled over the keep. Winter's hush always seemed deeper, a thickening of the world's edges. In her solar she lit the candle, letting its cool scent cleanse the air of firewood musk. Then she spread maps across her desk, tracing Silver Hill's roads, marking likely ambush points. Every line represented lives converging. Farmhand, road warden, thief, beggar, court. She pressed thumb to a crossroads near Fair Isle, considering a shelter tower and patrol rotation. Yet her thoughts drifted to Arya, to seas beyond charts. She wondered what lay west of west, and whether any map would ever envelope her sister. A knock. Brisk. Sir Davin entered bearing a tray, mulled wine and spiced biscuits. "Eat," he urged, brow knitted. "You missed supper." She relented, dunking a biscuit. Cinnamon steam curled upward, warming her lashes. What do they say of the queen who snacks alone? That she must be plotting something dreadful, Davin deadpanned, then softened. "Something weighs heavy tonight." She gestured to the maps. "Bandits, debts, pirates, and my sister is half a world away." She sipped. "Sometimes the realm feels vast enough to swallow even a queen." Davin set a hand lightly on the table, not daring more. "Winter is long," he said, "but it ends. Wolves stride through it stronger." She met his eyes, a steadfast gray like winter rivers. "Thank you," she said quietly. When he withdrew, she rolled the maps and doused the candle, though its resin scent clung like a blessing. Sleep claimed her swiftly. Dreams carried her through the god's wood of Winterfell. Snowflakes fell upward, swirling into a sky of deepest twilight. Beneath the heart tree, Bran waited. Not kingly, not broken, simply her brother. Ravens perched among bleached branches, silent. "I feared I would not find you," she told him. You found yourself, he replied. That is harder. He showed her a vision, a table of children in the orphan infirmary, each carving small wooden figures. Benjen safe among them, laughter bright. Then a glimpse of Jarell escorting grain wagons, villagers raising candles as the convoy passed. But the scene shifted, a cloaked figure sharpening a dirk, etched with a lion's tail hilt. In the dream, torchlight flickered off steel. Danger? She asked. Possibility, Bran whispered. Threads can fray. She reached for him but woke with a start, dawnlight already lining the shutters. Her skin prickled. The dirk's curved tail haunted her. Lannister craft. She dressed swiftly in layered wool, and strode to the practice yard, where a handful of new recruits drilled under pale sky. Among them, a wiry youth thrust at straw rings with more enthusiasm than skill. She recognized him, Benjen, grown a season older, cheeks ruddy. He froze when he saw her. My lady, queen, I only watch, he stammered. Then watch with purpose. She motioned him closer and took a training blade from a rack. Gripped thus. She corrected his stance, angling shoulders, firming elbow. A sword is balance. Rush and you overreach. Hesitate and you lose timing. She demonstrated, slow and deliberate, slicing hay stuffed limb with precision. Benjen copied. His cut wobbled but struck. He grinned. Ser Devan approached, helm under arm. A recruit? Not yet, Sansa said. Just a boy learning balance. Davin's gaze flicked to her practice blade, amusement warming stern features. She returned it, wiping burlap dust from her gloves. See, he receives proper lessons, she told him. Oh, of course, Davin said. And there is news. Lord Tidos's second raven arrived. He handed another scroll. This, though, bore different news. A local septi burned. Bread for the hungry painted on rubble. But no lives lost. Instead, priests found crates of winter barley inside, untouched. A strange creed. Burn stone, spare grain. Tyrion joined them shortly, breath fogging. Symbolic warfare, he observed after reading. Food as message. They wished to shame lords. Violence that midwives compassion, Sansa murmured. Yet, fire spreads. Indeed, Tyrion agreed. And wildfire spreads faster. My sister taught us all too well. Sansa set her jaw. I will accompany Jarell's convoy. Tyrion opened his mouth, but she forestalled him. I will not brandish crown from safe distance while others risk ambush. We ride at first light tomorrow. Davin accepted without argument, though his eyes darkened with concern. Tyrion pinched the bridge of his nose. I will draft proclamations forbidding harm to relief transports, but we know parchment impresses few with empty bellies. Then we must ensure their bellies are no longer empty, Sansa said. That night, as final preparations buzzed through corridors, she penned letters to Bran and to Arya. The former of logistics, the latter of love. To Arya she wrote, the north wind still finds its way even through southern stones. When you tire of distant horizons, ours remain open. She sealed it with tawny wax impressed by a direwolf leaping over waves. They set out under low, snow-heavy sky. Sansa rode a dapple gray, cloak stirring. Jarell commanded vanguard, Davan rear guard. Wagons rattled, barrels of grain muffled with straw wide. Soldiers marched in staggered columns, plain cloaks disguised over mail. Miranda flitted along flanks, eyes everywhere. On the third night, they reached Silver Hill's outskirts, and word arrived of bread for the hungry occupying a quarry abutting the road. Jarell proposed a pre-dawn assault. Sansa countered with parley once again. At dawn, under slate clouds, she approached the quarry with 2 guards and Jarell at her side. The rest waited among frost-rimmed pines. Within the pit, makeshift palisades ringed canvas shelters. Atop a boulder, a figure addressed a crowd of peasants clustered around steaming cauldrons. Porridge wafted rich oat aroma. The speaker turned as Sansa drew near. A young woman dressed in patched leather, hair shorn close, eyes a fervent amber reminiscent of autumn ale. I know you, Sansa ventured. I doubt it, your grace, the woman replied, descending. I am called Tara Peck. Once a miller's daughter until Lannister levies starved us. The realm levied, Sansa corrected. In days when war demanded coin. And war still chokes us. Tara gestured. These, she said, indicating peasants, have no coin for bread. We raid grain wagons, feed them. We burn tithe barns that hoard crops under lock and sigil. Sansa's gaze swept the camp. Children slurped from bowls, cheeks caved but bright. Old men sat nursing frostbit toes near braziers. The grain barrels bore crown sigils, those sent for relief. You steal from those who would help you, she said. They never arrive, Tara shot back. Corrupt bailiffs divert wagons. We intercept before they vanish into lordly larders. No, Jarrell bristled. Accusations without proof. Tara reached behind the boulder, brought forth a ledger, confiscated from a bailiff slain by his own fear when we cornered him. Marks for grain, requisitioned en route, then lost to attrition. The stores buried in a Lannister granary while villages starved. Sansa opened the ledger. The numbers matched crown inventory tallies she reviewed only a fortnight past. Yet here they were listed missing. Anger pulsed. She breathed steady. If this is true, justice will claim those bailiffs, she said. But seizing relief undermines faith. Help me deliver grain properly. Work with me. Tara studied her. Fierce suspicion battling longing. Words from thrones seldom bloom, she said. Then judge by deeds, Sansa answered. Ride with us. See distributions yourself. If we fail, your cause stands vindicated. A long silence, broken only by wind moaning down quarry walls. At length, Tara nodded. 3 of mine will accompany convoy. If you betray us, every hill will rise. Nashtaros. Then let us not betray, Sansa said, and extended a gloved hand. Tara clasped it. Her grip, calloused and shaking, pressed to desperation into Sansa's bones. They broke camp midday. Tara's 3 outriders, poor but proud, joined Myranda scouting ahead. By dusk, they reached the first hamlet, Crofter's Wain. Smoke drifted from crooked thatch, but streets lay near silent. At the square, 3 bailiffs hovered by the way house, faces blanching when soldiers surrounded them. Sansa dismounted. We bring winter grain and medical tinctures, she announced to shuttered windows. Come forth. No one moved. She eyed the bailiffs. Unlock the granary. The men hesitated. Jarrell seized keys from one, thrust him forward. Inside the granary, empty racks yawned. Dust drifted. Yet behind a false wall, cleverly hinged, they found stacks of sacks marked with a sigil of entwined lions. Tara's hiss cut air. Lannister grain hoarded while these folks starved. Villagers emerged slowly, gaunt forms clutching children. Sansa ordered soldiers to break open the stores. Grain poured like golden promise. Women wept, men bowed. She decreed bailiffs bound for trial, charges of theft and conspiracy. That night, a communal stew bubbled in the square cauldron, spice and fat thickening broth. Sansa sat by the fire beside a toothless grandmother, who pressed a knitted patch into her palm. A direwolf curled about a sheaf of wheat. Gratitude wrought in yarn. They repeated the work in hamlet after hamlet. In some, grain wagons were welcomed with cheers. In others they found hidden hoards spirited away by myopic stewards. Each discovery tightened Tara's jaw. Yet each also eased her distrust. She witnessed Sansa meaty sentences. Some jail, others reparative labor. When guilt was uncertain, Sansa convened ad hoc juries of villagers. Justice sprouted in soil, watered by consensus. Halfway through the circuit, a snowstorm struck with sudden ferocity. Visibility shrank to arm's reach. Wind howled like wolves starved. The convoy diverted to an abandoned watchtower on a rocky knoll. Inside, stone walls trapped cold but blocked wind. Fires were built, blankets distributed. Sansa moved among her people, checking for frostbite. She found Tara seated alone, staring into flames. My brother starved last winter, Tara said without preamble. He begged at a manor gate. They set dogs on him. I swore never again. I'm sorry, Sansa murmured. Sorry doesn't feed bellies. No, she agreed. Action does. Stay with us beyond this road. Lead a royal grain commission. Root out hoarders. Tara looked up sharply. You'd make me official. Who better to scent rot than one who lived amid decay? Embers cracked. Tara's eyes glimmered. Let me think. Snow buried the world for 2 days before skies cleared to brittle blue. They pressed on, distributing final stores in Silver Hill proper. Lord Titos met them at his keep, sheepish at reports of corrupt bailiffs under his oversight. Sansa demanded immediate land audits, oversight by Tara's nascent commission. Lord Titos acceded. Humbled, the return journey proved calm until Blackbriar Pass. Evening shadows pooled when a lone rider emerged, banner of truce raised, a knight in tarnished lion-red mail, helm crested with gold. He requested audience and was permitted under watch of 3 guards. Sansa recognized him. Ser Rick Redwine, once sworn to Lannisters. He bowed stiffly. Your Grace, I come with caution. Lord Gerald has convened private council at Casterly Rock. Word is he entertains overtures from Pentoshi financiers to fund a sellsword host under pretext of expanding trade. His voice dropped. Bad blood lingers over the gold cloak convictions. He claims your justice undermines Lannister authority. Tyrion, she thought, will anticipate but still be pained. Why warn me? She asked. Because I lost brothers to folly, Ser Rick replied. And I would rather break with a prideful lord than see the realm bleed again. She weighed sincerity in his eyes. Return, she said finally. Tell Lord Gerald I invite him to King's Landing come first thaw. We shall discuss grievances openly. Should he refuse, I will bring my counsel to his gates. Not with swords, but with the realm's eyes watching. Ser Rick bowed, relief slumping shoulders. He rode off into darkening path. They reached the capital as winter solstice neared. Snow mantled rooftops like icing sugar. Bells tolled from the great septii, their peal mellow. Sansa entered the Red Keep exhausted but heart buoyed. Relief delivered, hoarders exposed, new ally earned in Tara. Yet Bran's dream of the lion-tailed dirk nagged her mind. She ordered heightened watch, but celebrations of solstice proceeded. Tents sprouted across the dragon pit shadow, offering sweet wine, sugared almonds, puppet shows. Sansa made a ceremonial circuit through the festival, flanked by Devan, Tyrion, and Miranda. Children pressed close with wooden wolves. She stooped to sign little shields. At dusk, a troop of jugglers lit torches and flung them skyward, sparks scattering like meteor showers. Sansa stood near a mulled cider stall, cloak pulled tight, cheeks flushed by firelight. Crowds jostled good-naturedly. Somewhere a lute trilled jaunty chords. Then she glimpsed him, a man in battered cloak, moving against the flow, eyes locked on her. He slipped a hand beneath cloak hem, flash of steel shaped like a lion's curling tail. Time slowed. Miranda, ever watchful, shouted, pushing through. Davin's hand flew to sword, but the assassin lunged first, dirk glinting. Sansa pivoted as she had practiced, cloak swirling. The blade kissed wool. Snagged. Davin's shoulders slammed the assailant, driving him to snow-slushed earth. Miranda's boot stamped the wrist. Steel skittered away. Chaos erupted, screams, guards converging. Sansa pressed a palm to her side, only cloak torn, skin unbroken. Breath gusted white. The would-be killer snarled beneath Devan's knee, spitting. Lion's blood will drown the wolf. Devon hauled him upright. Name? Adric Lannister, he rasped through broken teeth. Glory to the Rock. They dragged him to a holding cell, while Tyrion dispatched squads to scour festival grounds for accomplices. Sansa insisted on questioning him within the hour. In the dungeon's chill gloom, torchlight wavered across damp walls. Adric knelt in chains, hair matted. Tyrion leaned against a pillar, face drawn. Sansa approached, calm but stern. You sought my life, she began. Why? Justice. Adric spat. You shame Lannister name, jail our men, bleed our coffers. The Rock remembers. Your grievances lie with me. "Not with children in city streets," she replied. "Yet you swung blade amidst innocence." "They are sheep," he sneered. "Only lions and wolves matter." She shook her head. "The realm belongs to neither beast alone, it is forest and field as well." She studied him. "You will stand trial, your lord's complicity will be weighed." He laughed bitter. "Gerald sent no command. I act of pride and love." Tyrion stepped forward, sorrow flickering in mismatched eyes. "Your love mislays honor," he said. "The lions I knew protected cubs, not threatened them." Adric slumped silent. Guards escorted him away. In the corridor, Tyrion exhaled heavily. Gerald may not have ordered this, but his rhetoric fertilizes such weeds. "So we prune," Sansa said. Openly. That night she convened emergency council. News of attempt spread already, carried by eager tongues. Some advised martial law. Others demanded preemptive strikes on Casterly Rock. Sansa listened, hands folded. "We answer with justice, not panic," she pronounced. "Tomorrow, Adric stands before tribunal. Let due process demonstrate our strength." She turned to Tyrion. "Draft invitation to Lord Gerald, urging cooperation lest speculation breed unrest." Tyrion nodded wearily. "I will write it in gold ink." Jarrell proposed bolstering city watch with veterans of the Eyrie, impartial to lion or wolf. Sansa approved. Samwell suggested sermons extolling mercy balanced with rule of law. Sansa agreed, cautioning against inflaming sectarian sentiment. When council ended, she retreated to her private chapel, a small octagonal space warmed by beeswax candles. She knelt before a plain wooden altar carved with both seven-pointed star and weirwood leaves interlaced. She prayed not for vengeance, but for clarity to guide wavering hearts. Afterward, she found Miranda waiting by the door. Arms folded. "You keep giving second chances," Miranda said. "Someone must," Sansa replied, stepping past. "The realm has exhausted firsts." Days later, Adric's trial drew throngs to the throne room. Evidence plain, his guilt certain. But Sansa allowed full hearing. Witnesses recounted. He offered no remorse. The sentence: life at the wall. Some clamored for execution, but Sansa argued that a man spared to guard realms of men served penance and purpose alike. The court murmured discontent yet yielded. Lord Gerald's raven came soon after, clipped a scent to attend parley, laced with insinuations about city's safety. Sansa folded the letter with care. The dance would continue. Winter deepened. Rooftops pitched under white drifts, the black water's edge crusted in ice. Still, inside the orphan infirmary, laughter echoed as children carved their toys. Benjen proudly presented Sansa with a wooden candle crowned by flame. When she pressed it, a hidden hinge made the flame fold, extinguished. "To remind you that danger can bend but not break," he said, repeating words a guard had taught him. She smiled, heart aching sweetly. "Danger bends. It does not break." She tucked the candle into her cloak. That evening, Tyrion joined her on a rampart. "Word from Essos." "Arya booked passage west again," he said, offering a wineskin. "She may chase horizons forever." Sansa accepted a sip. "So long as she cases, she lives. That is enough." She gazed out over the moon-drenched city, light glaze of snow glittering. "Look at them. Thousands asleep, trusting stone and decree to guard their dreams." "Trusting you," Tyrion corrected. "Trusting us," she amended softly. Snowflakes began their silent descent, settling on fur, on stone. Each unique, fragile, yet together winter's cloth. Sansa lifted her face to the drift, letting cold kiss warm skin. She thought of the road behind and road ahead, of wolves and lions, bread and blades. She thought of a realm learning slowly that justice could root as deeply as mistrust, if tended with patience, watered with courage. And in that quiet, amid falling snow and steady breath, she vowed anew, not in thunderous decree, but in the still, sure marrow of her being, that this reign would last not by sword's edge, but by the sturdy weave of countless small mercies. For winter's trials would come, and perhaps greater ones beyond. Yet as long as hearts held faith and hands, joined across divide, the realm would endure. Below, lanterns winked out one by one as households surrendered to night. Sansa remained a while, sentinel against shadows, until only the hush of snow remained. Then she descended the stairs, footsteps light, cloak trailing silver dust. Tomorrow would bring council debates, Braavosi contracts, letters to draft, grievances to weigh. But tonight she carried within her the hush of falling snow. And with it, the quiet, enduring strength of a queen who would meet dawn once more with open eyes and steady heart. Oh, okay. In the hush before dawn, the queen's solar glimmered with candlelight, its tapestries shivering gently in a draught that crept under the doors. Sansa stood before the high-arched window, hands clasped behind her back, watching the first light soften the stones of King's Landing. The city's towers and domes cut black silhouettes against a sky painted with the faintest bands of gold and lavender. And as she gazed out, the moment stretched, a rare quiet before the world's noise. Down in the city, the street vendors were only now lighting their braziers, and a handful of small folk shuffled toward the markets, breaths curling like wisps of smoke in the morning chill. Behind her, Tyrion's footsteps broke the silence, the soft shush of slippers on rushes. "There's always something about the city at this hour," he said, voice still thick with sleep, or perhaps with memory. "You'd think all its wounds might finally heal, if only it could rest a little longer each morning." She turned, and for a heartbeat, she almost laughed at the sight of the queen's hand clutching a half-empty goblet before breakfast. But there was little mirth in her this morning. The failed assassination haunted her, the question of Lannister pride twisting through every letter, every look. She wondered if her mother or her father would have managed such bitter peace, and what it truly meant to rule by justice when the world's old bloodlines ran so thick. Tyrion was reading her thoughts again. His gaze was a sharp, gentle prod. "You have the meeting with Gerald's delegation today. Half the realm will watch what you do next, Sansa. The other half will make up a better story by nightfall. I'm ready." She forced herself to believe it. "But I am tired of parleying with men who mistake patience for weakness." He sipped, made a face. "Patience is a rare luxury, but you wield it like a blade. Never forget that." She smiled, and then turned away to watch the waking city a moment longer. Has the last of the witnesses come forward? 2 more this morning. Both swear Adric acted alone, but rumors fly like ravens. Gerald must be reined in, or every hungry lord with an old grudge will smell opportunity. She nodded, and took a deep, careful breath. Let's see if lions truly can learn restraint. As the sun crept above the horizon, casting broken gold through the windows, Sansa crossed the keep to her council chamber, the long tapestries of direwolf and 7-pointed star whispering as she passed. Miranda joined her with an armful of parchments, her moss-green eyes sharp and restless. Jyrell was already pacing at the door, chainmail glinting under her surcoat. Davin followed in quiet, resolute step. Inside the council chamber, the mood was tense and expectant. Lord Grafton, gray-haired and keen-eyed, was there, along with Grand Maester Samwell, hunched over a ledger, lips pressed thin in worry. Miranda took her place by the maps, already setting out markers for trade routes and recent outbreaks of fever in the city's lowest quarters. Sansa took her seat at the head, fingers drumming on the polished wood. "We meet Gerald's party in an hour," she began. "The trial has shown restraint. I want the city's watch doubled at the gates, but the main squares open and unthreatening. I will not give Gerald cause to claim I rule by terror." "Nanimtepo." Jyrell nodded, eyes as cool and blue as winter rivers. "The Erie's veterans are at each post. They take coin from neither lion nor wolf." Miranda slipped her a note. "Fresh news. Word from the Riverlands. Beric Blackbrow rides with the remnants of the Brotherhood, offering his sword for justice. He asks your leave to speak at the parley." Sansa considered. Beric was more legend than lord now, a man who had lived and died and lived again, though the stories made his wounds ever more mortal and his justice less certain. "Let him attend as an observer," she said finally, "but remind him that I do not tolerate private justice, nor fire and sword without law." Tyrion entered last, pulling his robe straight and fixing his mismatched eyes on Sansa Dee. All is in readiness. Gerald brings 20 bannermen and twice as many words. Shall I wager which will prove sharper? She almost smiled. Save your coin for the betting tables, Tyrion. Today, let's see what words can truly win. Now, when the bell sounded the hour, Sansa descended the main stair and made her way to the throne room. Its vaulted ceilings cold with winter, but the banners of House Stark and the 6 remaining kingdoms hung in silent witness. Gerald Lannister and his retinue entered through the great bronze doors, resplendent in gold and crimson, faces closed and proud. Gerald himself walked at their head, his mane of golden hair tied back with a fillet of red leather, his green eyes watchful, almost amused. Behind him marched his sons and cousins, all dressed for a courtly war. They stopped at the foot of the dais, and Gerald gave a courteous, shallow bow. "Your Grace," he said, voice as smooth as oiled wood, "I bring you the respects of Casterly Rock, and the grievances of a house too long beset by blame." Sansa motioned for him to stand. "You are welcome, Lord Gerald, but know that justice does not bend to grievance, nor mercy to pride. We speak openly here. Let the realm witness." Inska. He glanced around the throne room, its galleries crowded with courtiers, with small folk from the city, with the eyes of the council and foreign envoys, and in the shadowed rear, the plain cloaks of Tara Peck and her newly formed commission. "I see," he said, "that the Queen would have an audience for our dispute. Shall I recount each injury, or merely those that wound my house most?" Sansa let the words hang a moment, then gestured for him to continue. "Say what you will, and speak it true." He stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, every gesture careful, calculated. "My cousin Adric sought to avenge what he sees as insult and injury. The arrest and trial of our gold cloaks, the seizure of Lannister grain, the humiliation of our name. My house has paid in blood and coin for your justice, yet receives only suspicion and loss. Your cousin sought my life with a blade in the midst of children and city folk." Sansa answered, her voice level, but ringing through the stone. "He is lucky I spared his own. As for grain, your bailiffs hoarded what was meant for starving villages, and your guards turned away the hungry with sword and torch. You call this justice, Lord Gerald?" "Metal." He flushed. Briefly, a flicker of red at the throat. "You rule as if the world is newly made, but you forget that we have held these lands since the Andals crossed the sea. You cannot upend centuries without roots snapping, without stone cracking." She inclined her head. "Yet the world is newly made, Lord Gerald. It was burned to ash by fire and ambition. Do you claim those ashes as your inheritance? Or do you wish your house to flourish in a realm rebuilt, not in fear, but in fairness?" "Nenea? Sir." He hesitated, and in that small silence, the watching court leaned in as one. Sansa pressed forward. "I invite you to join the Crown's new Commission for Grain and Justice. Bring your accountants, your auditors, your sons and daughters. See for yourself that what I demand of the West, I demand of all. Transparency, equity, redress for the wronged. If you refuse, I cannot and will not shield your house from the consequences of defiance." Gerald's jaw worked. "You would set my house to police itself?" "I would set your house to serve the realm, as I set my own," she replied. "No one is above justice, not lions, not wolves, nor dragons, nor any who claim the blood of kings." For a moment, it seemed he would refuse. His bannerman shifted uneasily. But Tyrion caught his eye. Whether by some unspoken plea or threat, Sansa could not tell. Gerald bowed his head. "Very well. I will join your commission, and my house will provide the oversight you require. But let this be the end of old injuries. No, let it be the beginning of better days," Sansa answered, voice softening, just enough for hope. The crowd murmured, uncertain. But Sansa saw the effect. A dozen lords and ladies, even Beric in the shadows, looked at her not as a usurper or upstart, but as a force. Something new, and perhaps, for the first time, necessary. Afterward, when the Lannister retinue had retired to their guest apartments, and the court had scattered to wine and rumors, Sansa sat with her council. Tyrion slumped in his chair, exhausted but pleased. That was bloodless for a Stark and a Lannister. I suspect somewhere the gods themselves are confounded. Miranda sorted parchments, her gaze never quite still. Gerald will try to delay, to distract. But he will cooperate for now. And if the West prospers, his lords will push him further. Samuel Tarley cleared his throat. I have already begun collecting lists of all grain stores and their owners. It is a mighty archive. Jarrell said, the city is quiet for now, but the north sends word of snowstorm after snowstorm. Famine's edge is never far. Nesri. Sansa looked at her hands, at the faint scars from childhood falls, needle pricks, the old burn that marked her wrist from Blackwater's horror. She remembered her mother's advice. We do not rule by fear, but by love and memory. She would rule by memory, by remembering every kindness, every pain. She stood, thanked her counsel, and retreated to the small solar where she kept her own records. Benjen was there, sweeping. When he saw her, he grinned, all gaps and hope. Your Grace, the orphans wanted to thank you for the bread and new blankets. She knelt, Queen's gown be damned, and met his eyes. Thank you, Benjen, you keep hope alive. He beamed and ran off, a flash of youth, in the dim hall. She sat and wrote letters until her wrist ached, to the Lords of the Reach, reminding them of the Queen's peace and the need for healing. To Tara Peck, appointing her as royal overseer of grain and bread. To Samwell, thanking him for his diligence and asking him to appoint septas and maesters in every city and town to report injustices. She wrote to Arya, a longer letter full of longing and the smallest news. The gossip of the court, the taste of the city's bread, the scent of the sea wind. She did not beg her sister to return, but she let the letter thrum with invitation. The North is always your home, she wrote. But so is the world if you wish it. In the weeks that followed, the city shifted like thawing earth. Lord Gerald's auditors met with Tara's commission. Grain flowed more freely. The crown's justice spread, slow but inexorable. Bailiffs who abused power found themselves replaced by those with proven records, and for the first time, city and countryside alike held assemblies where even the humblest could petition the Queen's ear. But not all bent easily to change. In Old Town, the archmaesters sent word. Some balked at new royal decrees, seeing them as meddling. Sansa sent Samwell as her emissary, trusting in his gentle wisdom and his memory of walls, both high and humble. He rode south in the teeth of a late winter storm, carrying her writ. At the citadel, he spoke to the gathered conclave. Justice is the memory of pain, he said. We must not merely record history but learn from it and teach it. Some mocked him, but more listened. When he returned, he brought new apprentices for the city's hospital, and a pledge from the conclave to share medicines and food stores in times of famine. North of the Neck, winter's teeth were sharper still. News came of wildlings struggling along the shivering sea, their ships foundering on ice. Sansa sent a fleet of cogs, loaded with dried meat and seed, and offered safe harbor for any who wished to settle. Her council worried, but she was firm. If we sow kindness, even among those once called foe, the harvest will be peace. In Dorne, Prince Corys, ever shrewd, sent a princess to court, Mary's clever and laughing, who spoke with the queen of old wounds and new beginnings. She and Sansa found kinship over nights of lemon cakes and chess, each move a lesson in trust. Slowly, Dorne began to send more grain, more horses, more men for the queen's peace. Yet, not all challenges were grand. Each day Sansa visited the city's poorest quarters. She held babies, listened to the disputes of washerwomen and carpenters, sat with the dying. She attended the orphan infirmary and brought stories for the children, who giggled when she tried to mimic a knight's trumpet or the hoot of an owl. One night, as snow battered the city, a fire broke out in the Haymarket, threatening to swallow the entire quarter. Sansa rode there herself, cloak thrown over her nightdress, and formed lines of bucket brigades from all the city's walks. She pressed hands, shouted encouragement, and refused to leave until the last ember was stamped. The people saw her, not just as queen, but as one of their own, sweat-streaked and sooty, shivering in the cold. By dawn the fire was out, the market spared. As Sansa trudged back through the city, exhausted, She met a band of small folk who pressed into her hands a loaf of bread, still warm, and a simple iron brooch in the shape of a wolf's paw. "For the queen who walks with us," they said. She wore the brooch at every council meeting thereafter. Letters arrived from beyond the sea. Arya at last came. "It is strange to be the wolf among strangers," she wrote. "But I am alive. I dream of snow, and I remember the taste of home. If you need me, I will come. Until then, keep the faith." Sansa read the letter by candlelight, tears drying on her cheeks. Winter crept onward. The city was tired, but stronger, and everywhere hope flickered. The bread lines grew shorter, the orphan infirmary fuller of laughter than coughs. Lord Gerald, to his surprise, found that with honest grain came honest coin, and his house began grudgingly to praise the Queen's reforms. There were still shadows, still plots. Rumors of sellswords massing in pentos. Whispers of unrest in the Reach. Quiet anger among lords whose privileges had been pruned. But Sansa met each with measured calm. She held her court in public whenever possible, made her justice plain and let the people speak. She trusted Miranda's sharp ears and Jarell's sharp sword, trusted Samwell's memory and Tyrion's wits, and, more than all, trusted herself. One day, as the first crocuses broke through the last crusts of snow, Sansa walked the city's ramparts, listening to the distant songs of market minstrels and the bell of the great sept. Beside her, Miranda spoke softly. "You have changed them, you know. The people, they believe in the realm. Because you do." Sansa stopped and looked out across the city. In the distance, the white knife gleamed with the promise of thaw. "I only did what I promised. What my father would have done, what my mother would have done if given the chance." Myra smiled, a rare bloom on her careful face. "And you have given that chance to thousands." Sansa said nothing more, letting the city's chorus answer for her. The morning sun glinted off red tiles and golden domes, and the scent of new bread mingled with the sharp tang of the sea. In her heart, she felt the pulse of the realm, fierce and fragile, and knew that justice was not a monument, but a garden, something living, needing tending, vulnerable to frost but quick to green when sun and hands were gentle. And so, as the world edged toward spring, Queen Sansa of House Stark ruled on, not with fire, nor fear, nor dragon's might, but with the even hand and open ear that had made her name. In every judgment she remembered the small folk, in every mercy the memory of her kin, and in every sunrise the promise that peace, like spring, could come again and again, if only enough hearts dared to believe. Kakei. The crocuses endured, and with them came the year's true thaw, slow, incremental, as stubborn as any Northman's will. The city remembered each winter's wound, yet found itself startled by relief as ice shrank from the gutters. The black water shed its last dull crust, and the air thrummed with birds returning to battered but mending eaves. Sansa walked often through King's Landing now, unescorted save for Miranda's careful distance and a half-dozen plainclothes guards that melted into crowds. At first her presence in the streets had drawn stares and huddled whispers. Sometimes awe, sometimes skepticism, always curiosity. Over weeks, awe softened to familiarity, and rumor bent, slightly, to trust. The small folk called her the Queen of the Crocus, half in jest, half as warding charm. Children pressed purple blooms into her palm and giggled as she thanked them by name. She learned the rhythm of each district, when the morning carts would jostle for passage along Ropemaker's Lane, where the cleanest water ran at midday, what alley boys sang to sell sugared plums. She greeted smiths at their forges, breadwives by their ovens, sailors perched at wharves, their stories muddy as the tide. Sometimes, she visited the lowest hovels, the places where kings and queens had only ever passed in times of riot or reprisal. She did not bring alms or armed retinues, but listened, truly listened, to a widow's complaint of taxes, to a cobbler's plea for more grain in the bread, to the sharp and endless grievances of the city's mothers whose children vanished into gangs or illness or conscription. With each visit, she learned more of what the realm needed. Sometimes, it was a new grain measure or a prudent forgiveness of debt. Other times it was simply to be seen and to know that a crown might bow its head, if only for a heartbeat. These walks became ritual. Some on her council protested, warning of plots, of poisoners, of those who would seize her for ransom or revenge. She understood their fear, but would not yield to it. She had survived more danger than they could know. Joffrey's court, Littlefinger's snares, Ramsay's dungeon, the fire and ruin of 100 battles. She wore her scars as both armor and map. Every face she passed, she catalogued. Every wound she saw, she resolved to mend, or at least to witness. In the council chamber, the evidence of these walks became the engine of change. Jarrell brought reports from the Grain Commission, Tara now sending missives as crisp as spring wind, tracking every measure of barley, every loaf weighed, every steward held to account. Lord Gerald, perhaps still smarting from public loss, had delivered not only his own ledgers, but those of several minor bannermen. In exchange, Sansa granted his house a role in the new city markets, letting Lannister coin oil the gears of commerce, and Lannister pride find salve in honest trade. Slowly, the Lions began to trade not only grudges, but goods and counsel. Samwell's archive filled the old library of the Tower of the Hand. There, apprentices from the Citadel and clever girls from the city's orphanage copied ledgers and chronicles, preserved testimony from small folk and nobles alike. When Sansa visited, she found Sam reading with a child on each knee, his face radiant with delight as he told the tales of old Nan, her voice preserved in his ink, her words no longer vanishing like mist. He taught the children their letters, and let them help draft the new lawbooks that bore her seal. To Queen's Law, they called them, plain, precise, more readable than any before. Justice would not hide behind old tongues, nor be written so only the wise or wealthy could claim it. These books passed from hand to hand, copied into simple leaflets for every village, every sept and market. Sansa listened as much as she ruled, adjusting the laws with the wisdom of those who lived by their outcome, not merely those who wrote them. In the Reach, news came of a blight among the grapevines. Sansa sent healers and a treasury grant to aid Lord Redwine, with the provision that a portion of the next healthy harvest would be set aside for city and orphanages across the realm. In Dorne, Princess Marys wrote to say that Sansa's reforms had inspired her to establish similar commissions in Sunspear, and invited Sansa to visit when the next caravan of spring fruit arrived. Sansa accepted, already imagining the golden heat and the taste of lemon on her tongue. Letters from Arya became more frequent, short, blunt, but always a balm. "I hunted with the children of the Rhoynar," Arya wrote, in a hand grown almost elegant. "I am not lost. I have not forgotten how to come home." Sansa kept those letters in a box with her mother's sewing needles and Rob's first carved wolf. She read them in the quiet hours before council, or late at night when the city's lamps guttered and the silence threatened to become heavy with memory. With the coming of true spring, Sansa called the first great assembly in living memory. The invitation went out across the realm, to lords, to the Free City's envoys, to the new councils of smallfolk, craftsmen, and guilds. The assembly would not be held in the throne room, too cold, too haunted, but in the Dragon Pit, whose vast ruins had seen fire and blood, and now would see the slow, awkward forging of peace. On the morning of the assembly, the city thrummed with visitors. Lords in silks, septas in homespun, sellswords brushing shoulders with hedge knights, brewers, fishwives, stewards, scribes, Godawat. The banners of the great houses hung from broken arches. The wolf and lion, the trout and the rose, the sun and spear, the golden kraken, the three-headed dragon rendered now only in memory and tribute. Common banners joined them. Scales of a blacksmith, the blue of the watermen, the green of the healers, and the sheaf of Tara's grain commission. Each was honored, none was bowed. Sansa arrived with no crown, only the silver circlet and a mantle of stark gray. At her side walked Tyrion, eyes gleaming at the spectacle. Miranda, unflinching. Samwell, carrying a stack of new laws. Jarrell, sword at her hip, bearing a staff instead of a banner. Tara sat among the grain workers, her face open, no longer set in suspicion. Lord Gerald was present, his mane tamed and his sons at his flanks, eyes wary but attentive. The assembly began in uncertainty. No one, not even Sansa, knew quite how to speak. At last, a blacksmith stood up, voice trembling but bold. "My queen," he said, "what is justice if not bread in the belly, steel in the hand? A safe street for our children?" He spoke for his guild, but his words rippled through the crowd, repeated in softer voices. Safety, food, a voice for those long unheard. Asepta spoke next, telling of orphans left in the wake of dragons and bandits, and how Sansa's new orphan law gave them shelter, schooling, the chance for a life not marked by crime or hunger. A Dornish merchant praised the grain commission, saying that even the Rhoynar now sought Sansa's advice on fair trade. One by one, small folk and nobles alike stood to speak, not only grievances but ideas. They spoke of fair weights and measures, of river rights, of marriage and inheritance, and the need to train more healers. They spoke too of fear, of lords who still pressed for old privileges, of wildlings at the border, of bandits who would not yield to reform. Sansa listened, her counsel taking notes, every concern recorded. When it was her turn, she stood in the ruined amphitheater and let her voice ring clear. We cannot undo all that was lost. We cannot make a new world overnight, but we can build, stone by stone, kindness by kindness, justice that does not favor the rich or the ruthless. If I am to be queen, I must be queen for all of you, no matter your birth or your banners, your old gods or your new. Nendabap. She pledged to hold the assembly every year, to keep the law plain, the markets fair, the bread measured by weight and not by bribe. She promised to hear the smallest voices and to guard against the pride of the mighty. She asked for patience, for courage, and for faith, not only in her, but in one another. When she finished, a hush lingered, a fragile, reverent quiet that had nothing of fear in it. Then, from the far end of the ruined pit, a child's voice called, "Long live the Queen of Crocuses!" The crowd laughed, and then the chant swelled, honest and uncertain, until it filled the ruined vaults. Sansa bowed her head, letting it wash over her, not as triumph, but as burden, as vow. Through that summer, the reforms deepened. Bread was abundant in the city, grain stores monitored and sealed by commission and council alike. Water lines were repaired, cesspits cleaned, new wells dug. Orphans were apprenticed not only in kitchens and stables, but in the archives, the forges, the healers' halls. Samwell's law apprentices, dubbed by the small folk the White Quills, began traveling the realm, helping lords and stewards to implement the new laws. Some lords grumbled, others saw the wisdom, and found that peace, in the end, made for richer harvests and fuller treasuries. In Dorne, Princess Maria's reforms spread. In the north, Lyanna Mormont's kin sent word that even the mountain clans were beginning to settle into the new order. Wildlings along the shivering sea traded furs and fish for grain, some even choosing to stay the winter in small villages, their children learning the tongue of the south. The first trial of a noble lord under the Queen's law was a test of all she had built. Lord Harlton, a minor bannerman from the Riverlands, had been accused by his own small folk of theft and assault. In the past, such a case would have been settled by duel or coin. Sansa insisted on a public trial, presided over by herself, Tyrion, and Samwell, with representatives from the Riverlands, the city, and the new Smallfolk Council. The trial lasted 3 days. Testimony, evidence, and finally a verdict. Guilty, the sentence was not death or exile, but restitution and years of service to the very villages he had harmed. It was imperfect justice, but it was justice nonetheless, and the people saw that the Queen's promise was not just words. Not all was peace, of course. There were outbreaks of fever, a fire in the river district, a brawl between rival merchant companies that nearly spilled into civil strife. But each time, the Queen responded swiftly, sending healers and food, convening public tribunals, brokering peace with calm and presence. When autumn came, Arias Raven arrived, a longer letter than any before. She wrote of distant islands, of storms survived, of the scent of unknown spices, and of the memory of Winterfell in every twilight. At the end, she promised to return, and Sansa felt, for the first time, that her pack was truly whole, even across oceans. On the first day of the harvest festival, Sansa stood at the gates of the city, greeting each caravan. Benjen, now a head taller, walked beside her, a staff carved with wolf and crocus in his hand. He had become her page, her message runner, and sometimes her silent shadow in council. The people greeted him as warmly as the queen, and he answered every question with the confidence of one who had known hunger, and now knew purpose. That night, at the great feast in the dragon pit, the banners flew above long tables laden with bread and roast, cider and cakes. The music was wild and sweet, and for the first time in living memory, lords and smallfolk danced together, even Lord Gerald managing a stiff smile when Miranda teased him into a clumsy reel. At the high table, Sansa raised her cup. "To the realm," she said, "and to every hand that built it. May we never forget the hunger that brought us here, nor the mercy that keeps us whole." The feast went on deep into the night, the dragon pit ringing with laughter and music, the city glowing with lamps and the sound of hope. Yet the queen did not rest. With each season, she walked her city, rode to distant holds, sat in judgment, listened in the silence between words. She found peace in her garden, where the first snow came early, dusting the crocuses white. She wrote letters to Arya, to Mares, to Samwell at the citadel, to the wildlings beyond the wall. And she never forgot the lessons of winter, nor the hunger that haunted every spring. She ruled not as a conqueror, nor as a martyr, but as a gardener, patient, vigilant, always learning. Her justice was not perfect, but it was alive, changing, rooted in the memory of pain and the promise of better days. Long after her reign, the small folk would tell stories of the Queen of Crocuses, the girl who survived dragons and kings, and made the realm bloom again with nothing more than patience, courage, and the stubborn kindness that even winter could not kill. And in every city square, in every village, in every orphan's song, her name endured. Sansa the Just, the queen who walked, who listened, and who never ever gave up hope. The years unfolded as quietly as petals opening after rain, and beneath Sansa's rule the kingdom drifted. Slow, deliberate, sometimes halting, toward an age unlike any that had come before. It was not an age of dragons, nor heroes, nor the easy triumph of the good. It was an age of memory and rebuilding, and the thousand careful negotiations required to mend a world scarred by ambition and betrayal. As the harvests grew steady and the markets bustled with life, King's Landing itself seemed to shrug off the sullen stains of its past. The Red Keep lost its sheen of menace, its courtyards filled with laughter, with the clatter of new apprentices learning trade instead of plotting war. Maegor's Holdfast, once the fortress of the fearful and cruel, was transformed. One tower became a hospital, where Grand Maester Samwell oversaw the healing of wounds and minds alike. Another housed the Children's Archive, a place for orphans to read, to learn, to tell their own histories. Sansa, walking those corridors in dawn's hush, carried with her the quiet pride of a woman who had once been powerless in these same halls. She moved among her people as one of them, always listening, her hands scarred but gentle, her eyes bearing the softness and the steel that had seen her through the wars of men and monsters. Her counselors changed as the seasons did. Tara, still fierce and practical, now sat beside her as Mistress of Grain. Jorel Mormont commanded the city watch with a blend of mercy and iron that few could match. Miranda Reed, never quite at ease in the thick of court, wandered often between the Queen's side and the wilds, her loyalty unspoken but constant. Tyrion, older and grier, remained her hand, his wit as sharp as ever and his affection for the Queen evident in the way he teased and worried over her, as if she were both daughter and sovereign. There were years when peace trembled. The storms across the narrow sea sometimes sent pirates to prey on the coasts, and the Reach and the Westerlands still traded insults and old grievances as easily as goods. In the north, blizzards could swallow whole caravans, and wildlings occasionally slipped over the wall, sometimes with weapons, more often with pleas for sanctuary. Sansa answered each threat as she had learned from the north, steady, watchful, determined never to allow panic to set the terms of her justice. One late summer, a letter arrived from Sunspear, written in the elegant, flowing hand of Princess Merays. Sansa read it aloud to her council one evening, as the lamps guttered low, and the city's festival echoed faintly from the riverbank. "My dearest sister of the realm," it began, "the first figs have ripened in the water gardens, and the prince himself would welcome your counsel on a matter of succession. There is a question as to whether the law of Dorne, which makes no distinction between sons and daughters, might be recognized more broadly by the crown. Merays had a daughter she intended as heir, and wished to know if Sansa's own experience might convince the Council of Lords to honor the Dornish precedent." Tyrion pursed his lips. A realm led by women. How many old men will faint at the mere thought? Samwell smiled. "It is the law in Dorne, and in parts of the north. The Vale has followed it at times too." Jarrell looked at Sansa. "Do you wish to travel?" Sansa nodded. "I do. It is time to show the realm that justice knows no borders, and that a daughter's worth is equal to any son's." Preparations began for the journey south. The route would take Sansa through the Reach, where Lord Redwyne's harvest of sweet grapes was in, and the air hung thick with the promise of new wine. In Old Town, she stopped to tour the Citadel, where Samwell's reforms had given rise to a new class of maesters. Men and women trained together, learning the healing arts and the histories of the common folk, not only the great lords. The conclave, now presided over by an archmaester from the Reach and a woman from Gulltown, welcomed her with cautious respect. Sansa's arrival in Sunspear was greeted by a celebration as bright as any she had seen. A riot of colors, trumpets and drums, children tossing handfuls of petals, the banners of sun and spear snapping in the breeze. Princess Merays met her at the gates, laughter in her eyes, her arm around her small daughter, who looked up at Sansa with a gravity that reminded her of herself years ago in Winterfell's great hall. They walked together through the water gardens, talking of law and the long memory of women who had shaped Dorne. Merays told stories of her own mother's rule, of peace hard bargained and kept only with constant vigilance. "A queen cannot rest on old victories," Mary said. "She must wake each morning and win her crown again." They sat under the heavy shade of a fig tree and drafted a letter to the Council of Lords, proposing that the law of succession be made plain, no distinction of gender, only worth, wisdom, and the will of the people. Sansa sent a copy north, east, and west, and waited to see who would stand with her. The answer came slowly, but it came. From the Vale, Lady Randa Royce offered her signature. From the north, Lyanna Mormont's kin sent a seal. In the Reach, Lord Redwyne signed with a flourish, and in the Riverlands, the Common Council of Fairmarket pledged their support. Even Gerald Lannister, after much grumbling, added his name, though he wrote a second letter to Sansa alone, warning her not to trust every highborn lady to rule more wisely than a common shepherd. When Sansa returned to King's Landing, the realm had changed in ways subtle but profound. Daughters were named in the ledgers of inheritance, girls apprenticed to guilds as boys had for centuries, and in the cities and the fields, women who had been left behind by war now took seats at the tables where grain was weighed and law was judged. One autumn night, as the queen sat by the fire in her private solar, the wind brought with it the distant howl of wolves, rare, this far south, but unmistakable. She looked up from her book and smiled. "Home," she whispered. Benjen, now taller than her shoulder and learning the ways of law and sword both, entered with a letter. "It's from Arya," he said, pride in his voice. He'd learned to read the names to trace the Stark seal. Sansa took the letter, her hands trembling slightly. Arya's writing was bold, spiky as a bramble. "I have crossed the sea and seen wonders," she wrote. "In the Summer Isles I learned new tongues. In the west I chased a white wolf across a strand of black sand. In Bravos I found a man who once knew you." She wrote of storms and sun, of freedom and loneliness, and always of the pull toward home. "I am coming back," Arya promised at the end. "The world is wide, but I am not lost. I will come to Winterfell by spring." Sansa closed her eyes and held the letter to her heart, her mind full of the faces she had loved and lost, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest justice was simply survival. The last days of autumn passed in a swirl of harvest feasts, of council meetings and laughter in the city squares. Sansa attended the wedding of Jorel Mormont, who married a quiet healer from the north, their vows spoken under the new white banner of the Queen's law. She sat for portraits with Benjen and a dozen orphans who had found their homes in the halls of the Red Keep, their smiles more enduring than any crown. As winter's edge drew near, word came of a wildling band stranded in the Frostfangs, starving, their children succumbing to cold. Sansa sent a rescue party led by Miranda, who returned weeks later with the wildlings in tow. Tough, wary but grateful, Sansa herself greeted them at the city's edge, offering bread and a place by the fire. Some chose to journey south, others north to new villages. "They are not our enemies," she said to her council. "They are our future." The white quills, now dozens strong, band out across the realm. They carried with them law books, bread, seeds for spring planting, and the stories of the Queen's justice. They listened as much as they spoke, and soon it was not just King's Landing that changed, but the outlying villages and holdfasts where, for the first time, commoners could call on the law and expect to be heard. In the second winter of her 7th year as queen, Sansa returned to Winterfell for the first time in many seasons. The castle was unchanged in outline, but alive with new voices. The kitchens bustled, the stables rang with laughter, and in the Godswood, the ancient heart tree stood as sentinel as ever. Bran waited for her there, wrapped in a heavy gray cloak, his eyes distant and strange, but kind. "You did what you promised," he said as the snow fell softly around them. "You kept them safe." She knelt before the heart tree, letting the old gods witness her thanks. "Not always," she said quietly. "Not everyone. No one can save them all," Bran replied. "But you built a realm where more are saved than lost. And you remembered." She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "You never tell me what you see." He touched her hand, a rare gesture. "I see you, Sansa. That is enough." That evening, Arya arrived at Winterfell's gate. She was older, wind-burned and scarred, her eyes keen and hungry as ever. The sisters embraced and for a long while said nothing, holding the memory of their parents, their brothers, their shared pain between them. Jon Snow sent word from beyond the wall, a short letter, but full of warmth. "Ghost runs with me. The world is wild, but your peace is felt even here. You were always stronger than any of us, little sister." The hall at Winterfell filled with laughter that night. Old songs, old stories, new ones woven among them. Sansa sat with her family and friends, her court and her council, and felt a sense of home more profound than any crown. The years continued. The queen grew older, her hair silvered at the temples, her hands more lined, her steps slower. Benjen was knighted in a quiet ceremony. Tara retired to her family's mill, her life's work 100 granaries that would never again be hoarded. Samwell, after years at court, returned to his family and wrote the great histories of the new realm, chronicling not just battles but the breadlines and the moments of grace. Arya came and went, restless and free, but always returning, her legend growing, but her loyalty to her sister unshaken. Sansa's reign was not without hardship. There were lean years, plague, border skirmishes, the occasional rebellion crushed by a coalition of lords and commoners alike. She faced each with a steady heart and an honest counsel, and the memory of what it was to be alone and powerless. She remained, until her last breath, the queen who walked her streets. When she died, the bells tolled not only in King's Landing, but in every village and city and holdfast. Bells of mourning, but also of gratitude. In her will, she left instructions for no golden tomb, but a simple stone set in the garden, where the crocuses bloomed each spring. Here lies Sansa Stark, queen of the realm, who listened. Her laws endured, copied in every keep and carried by the white quills for generations. The common people never forgot her. On the first day of every spring, children placed crocuses on her stone, and old women told the story of the queen who fed the hungry and made peace with bread and mercy, rather than fire and sword. And so in time, the realm she shaped outlasted her. The age of dragons faded to memory, but the age of mercy endured. Woven not by steel or sorcery, but by the unyielding hope of a woman who believed that justice, once sown, could outlast even the longest winter. You know, it was in the last full flush of spring, a time when the world seemed almost newly made, that Sansa first realized how much the realm had changed, and how deeply those changes had taken root, far beyond the reach of banners and decrees. She walked beneath blossoming chestnuts in the King's Landing gardens, the air thick with bees and the warm honeyed breath of 1,000 blooms, the stones beneath her slippered feet warm from morning sun. Children played among the hedges, chasing each other with willow branch swords, their laughter untroubled, carrying over the walls and down into the city's cobbled lanes. Such a sound would once have been impossible here. Now it was as ordinary as the sea breeze. Her steps brought her to the southern wall, where the city fell away toward the river, and she lingered, watching the market come alive. The stalls were bright with painted awnings, cobalt blue, lemon yellow, a patchwork of color. Fishmongers called, bakers hawked fresh bread, musicians tuned battered lutes, and everywhere Sansa heard not just the clamorous commerce of survival, but the confident bustle of a people secure in their day. At her side, Miranda Reed spoke softly, her voice still carrying the music of the neck. "Do you remember the old market, before you were queen?" "I remember blood in the gutters and men fighting over moldy bread." Sansa nodded, remembering. The memory no longer carried the sharp sting it once had. "I remember. I think the city remembers too, somewhere. That's why we must never grow complacent." "That's histoire." Miranda smiled sidelong. "You've changed the city. But you haven't changed, not where it counts." "I hope not," Sansa said, though she wondered sometimes, seeing the lines at her eyes in the looking glass, feeling the weight of years in her bones. "But you're right. Memory can fade. Fear can return in a single bad winter, a single cruel hand on the scales. We have to teach them how to remember too." As she spoke, a group of children darted up to her, out of breath and grinning, holding a cluster of crocuses. They bowed awkwardly, their manners a patchwork of what the Septus had taught and what they'd learned from watching their elders. "For you, your grace," the boldest said, holding the flowers up. Sansa knelt and accepted the blooms, tucking them into the braid that hung over her shoulder. "Thank you. May your games always be fair, and your bread always warm." The children beamed, then fled with shouts of laughter. Miranda watched them go, her expression unreadable. "They'll remember this, you know. A queen who listened, who played and forgave, not just judged." "Nemusimu." Sansa straightened, brushing the dust from her skirt. "That's the hope. The smallest things become the longest stories in the end." A bell rang from the sept, and Sansa turned toward the keep, her day already mapped out. A council with the guildmasters on the harbor taxes, an audience with the master of coin over the new orphan houses, a visit to the city's largest infirmary where a new treatment for the fever had cut deaths by half. Her world was never quiet, but in its busy constancy, she found a kind of peace. The council was in full session when she arrived. Tyrion was presiding, a mug of herbal tea in hand. He no longer drank wine at the table, a concession to age and health, but his mind was as clear and acerbic as ever. Tara Peck sat at his right, her commission reports in order, her eyes alive with the satisfaction of honest work. Jorel Mormont was there, already in armor, having put down a squabble in the Rivergate district that morning. Samuel Tarley entered last, a sheaf of parchment under one arm, trailing 2 young apprentices who looked as if they'd not slept in days. Sansa took her seat at the head, nodding greetings, letting the conversation ripple through her before she spoke. "Let's begin with the harbor," she said, and for the next hour she listened, guided, questioned, always looking for the silent stories beneath the numbers. The stevedores whose wages had risen, the new trade routes bringing silk from Lyne and spice from Dorne, the way each cask of wine meant a meal for a child in the city's poorest quarter. When the matter was settled, she turned to the apprentices, who blinked nervously as she smiled at them. "You're the new white quills," she said. "Tell us what you've learned." The first, a red-haired girl with a scattering of freckles, stood and read her notes. "We've been surveying the city seps, your grace. The new laws have cut the number of beggars by 1/3. More orphans are being apprenticed to trades, especially with the master bakers and the ferrymen's guild." The second, A boy from the Stormlands added, "The new infirmary has helped too, but there's still fever in the river district. Some say the well is fouled. We took a sample for the healers, as instructed." Samuel looked pleased. "You did well. The Citadel will send more copper sulfate. And next week, the Queen herself will walk the district. Let them see justice is not only for the great and good." Sansa thanked the apprentices, dismissed them, and watched as they left, already arguing over the finer points of the law. She felt a fierce, private pride in them. The white quills were her legacy as much as the laws or the granaries, and their questions, their hunger for fairness, gave her hope that the realm would endure long after her reign. In the afternoon, Sansa donned her plainest cloak and walked to the river district, accompanied only by Miranda and 2 city guards. The streets here were narrow and crooked, but the faces that greeted her were open, if cautious. At the well, she listened to the women's complaints, watched as the healers distributed their medicines, promised to send stone workers to repair the pump. A woman, no older than Sansa but bent by labor and loss, caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered. "We were forgotten for so long. My daughter will apprentice at the archive. She says she wants to write stories like the Queen." "Oh." Sansa squeezed the woman's hand. "Then she shall. Bring her to the keep, and I'll see her welcomed." That night, as Sansa sat by the window in her solar, reading through the day's petitions, Benjen came with news. He was a young man now, nearly grown, his voice deeper, his stride sure. "A raven from the north, Your Grace," he said, holding out the sealed letter. "Lady Lyanna writes of heavy snows. She asks for more seed grain in case the winter holds." Nane sat. Sansa broke the seal, read the letter, and nodded. "Draft a response. She'll have all she needs. And send word to the white quills in the north. Remind them to keep close watch for anyone who may be left behind. The old and the sick first." Benjen bowed, already scribbling in his neat hand. She watched him go, a pang of remembered loss and present pride twisting in her chest. He was one of hundreds now, hundreds who bore the mark of her reign. Children of famine and war, now apprentices, guards, scribes, healers. They were her family, in a way the old stories had never prepared her for. The days grew longer. Sansa visited the wildling villages along the wall, where the white quills had built new houses and brought seed and stock. The wildlings, tough, stubborn, still wary of southern ways, welcomed her with guarded respect. She listened to their grievances, their stories of hunger and exile, and made a vow that their children would have a place in the realm. In the Riverlands, she attended the wedding of Tara's eldest son, a great gathering of lords and small folk alike, the fields alive with music and laughter. Lord Gerald Lannister himself came, older and thinner, but more gracious, bringing gifts of gold and fine glass. Sansa danced that night with Tara, with Lord Gerald, with a dozen small folk children who had never seen the Queen before, and treated her with a shy awe. At harvest, she visited the Reach, riding through golden fields with Lady Randa Royce and the new Mistress of Laws, a sharp-witted girl from Old Town. They spoke of taxes and justice, of the balance between mercy and order. Sansa listened to the farmers, the reapers, the old women who had survived a dozen wars and a dozen kings, and learned from them the shape of the land's patience. Autumn brought Arya to Winterfell at last, riding in with a wild company of travelers, her hair wind-blown, her eyes shining. They embraced in the great hall, surrounded by kin and retainers, and sat long by the fire, sharing stories, trading news. Arya had seen wonders, suffered trials, but she returned home not out of restlessness, but out of choice. "I thought I'd wander forever," Arya said one night as they walked the Godswood. "But every path led here, sooner or later. You made the realm safe for people like me, people who don't belong anywhere until they're allowed to choose where they belong." Sansa took her hand, the old scars joining them as much as the new. "That's all I ever wanted," she said softly. "For all of us to have a place." They walked together beneath the red leaves, silent as the old gods, while the castle behind them hummed with life. Winter's approach found Sansa once again in King's Landing, the air sharp and clear, the sky washed with stars. The city was quieter now, its growth slowing as the cold crept in. Fires burned in every hearth, and the queen's bread wagons rolled daily to the poorest quarters. She presided over council in the old way, but the faces were younger. Benjen, now captain of the guard, Tara's daughter seated at the grain commission, Samuel's son a maester in training, Miranda's niece the newest white quill. Sansa saw herself in all of them, the stubborn hope, the wary wisdom, the unyielding drive to build something better. A report came from the north. The wildlings and Northmen had forged a pact, agreeing to share hunting grounds and winter stores. From Dorne, Princess Maryse wrote of her daughter's coming of age, a ceremony blending Dornish and Stark traditions. In the Vale, Lady Royce sent news of a new school for girls, named for Sansa herself. One night, as snow sifted down over the city, Sansa slipped from the keep and walked the lamplit streets. She paused in the market, where vendors were packing away their wares, and bought a loaf of bread from a boy not yet 10, his hands red with cold. "For you, my queen," he said, eyes bright. "You fed us when we were hungry. My mother says your name means hope." She accepted the bread, breaking it in half and handing the larger piece back. "Hope grows best when it's shared," she said. He grinned and vanished into the dark, and Sansa made her way back to the keep, the bread warm in her hand. Years slipped by, marked not by war but by the slow, certain accrual of peace. Laws were challenged and changed, refined and adapted. The white quill spread farther, into the Westerlands, across the narrow sea, bringing news of Sansa's justice to places that had never known a just queen. The archives swelled with histories, of battles, of treaties, of famines averted, of feasts shared, of births and deaths, and the ordinary miracles of everyday life. Benjen married a healer from Gulltown, and Sansa attended the wedding, her presence a benediction. Tara's grandchildren ran wild through the queen's gardens, playing at justice and counsel, inventing new laws for the kingdom of the crocuses. In her last decade, Sansa traveled less, preferring the slow rhythms of her garden, the company of friends and kin. Arya visited often, always with new tales, and sometimes stayed for months, quiet and content. When the end came, it was as gentle as the first thaw of spring. Sansa lay in her chamber, the window open to let in the scent of earth and flowers. Her hair was white as the crocuses that bloomed at her bedside. Her hands curled loosely around a letter from Arya and a child's wooden dire wool. Benjen and Arya kept vigil, and when Sansa's breathing slowed, Arya took her hand and whispered, "You kept your promise. You brought us home." Sansa's last thought was of Winterfell, of laughter echoing down its halls, of bread shared, and of the world remade by small kindnesses and patient hope. She slept, and the bells rang across the city, tolling not for the end, but for the long, bright memory of a queen who listened, and who loved, and who made peace as lasting as spring. In every corner of the realm, people gathered, at market squares, in halls and huts, by river and hearth, to lay flowers and share bread, to tell the story of Sansa the Just, the queen of crocuses, who taught them to remember, and to hope and to believe that peace, once sown, could outlast any winter. Yaki, Nanmaredi. In the gentle hush after Sansa's passing, the realm seemed suspended, breathless, as if waiting for a spring that would never quite end. It was not the hush of dread or uncertainty that once followed the death of kings. No cold terror rippled through the markets. No lords marshaled armies in secret. No servants fled with hoarded spoons. Instead, grief was open and honest, and carried in every hand, every gaze, every careful kindness. The bells of King's Landing rang for 3 days, sometimes in unison, sometimes overlapping like tides. No decree demanded this. It simply happened, as if the city had made a silent pact. On the first morning, people drifted from their homes in the pre-dawn dark, gathering in the squares and alleys, at city gates, before the doors of the sept, and in the new gardens planted atop what had once been burned and blasted ruin. They brought crocuses and daffodils and simple tokens: a loaf of bread, a cup of milk, a letter, a child's toy digi. Some came alone, others in families or knots of neighbors. A hush hung over them as they waited for the bells. And when the deep bronze voice rolled from the belfries, 100,000 hands found each other, strangers pressing palm to palm, bound by memory, loss, and something close to gratitude. Within the Red Keep, Arya and Benjen kept watch beside Sansa's bed. The queen lay as if simply napping, her face turned to the window, where the last snows melted on the sill and the first bees nosed among the crocus blooms. Arya sat in silence for hours, her presence both fierce and still, as if she could keep Sansa anchored through will alone. Benjen wept only once, in the small hours when the sky was black, and the world seemed, briefly, as cold as the years before Sansa's reign. When the time came, Arya herself carried Sansa's body to the garden she had loved, where the children of the orphanage stood in a ring, singing a northern lullaby. There, beneath the branches of a new-planted heart tree, she was laid to rest. The stone was plain, its carving simple. Sansa Stark, queen who listened. Crocuses and violets sprang in wild profusion from the earth around it, and each spring for 100 years, children would come to plant more. The days that followed were not frantic, but full of remembrance, of story, of small rites that grew into something enduring. Across the city, in every market and guild house, tales of the queen were spoken and written, gathered by the white quills into 100 slim volumes. They recorded not just her laws and proclamations, but the way she listened to a weaver's plea for better thread, the day she carried bread to a fevered street, the hour she stood in the rain at a wildling wedding, cloak streaming, hair plastered to her brow, never flinching. They wrote of her patience, her laughter, her willingness to be wrong and to change. The first council after Sansa's death convened in a hush, and for a moment no one sat at the queen's place. Benjen, pale and solemn, took the seat not at the head but at the side, and Arya, her face unreadable, stood behind. The council chambers, once echoing with the voices of quarrelsome lords, now hummed with the low confidence of those who had learned to govern by service rather than ambition. Tara Peck, old and bent but sharp as ever, opened the meeting by reading aloud from the queen's last letter. A letter of thanks, full of hope for the future, and a simple admonition: justice must always begin by listening. It was not so simple to move on. There were debates, long and sometimes painful, about what should come next. The laws Sansa had shaped were living things, still changing as new voices rose. There were those who feared a return to old ways, but the city itself resisted. Bread lines remained open. Grain flowed. The city watch answered to the common courts as much as the lords. The white quills swelled in number and reputation, sent now to far corners of the realm, recording not only the law, but the needs and wishes of every village. The succession itself was plain. Sansa had left no direct heirs, but her council was strong, and her chosen heir was Benjen, not by blood, but by the slow, deep loyalty of a life shaped in her shadow. He was crowned not with a new crown, but with her old circlet, at a ceremony in the Dragon Pit, attended by every house and guild, wildling and orphan, knight and healer, all gathered in the ruined splendor where she had once held the great assembly. Benjen's reign began with a pledge: we shall not rule by memory alone, but by the hope we build today. He was no warrior, but a listener, a traveler, and a friend to children and outcasts. He ruled from the council chamber and the city streets, often seen walking among his people, his guards rarely more than a pace behind, always welcomed, never feared. He kept the garden open to all. And on the anniversary of Sansa's death, he knelt by her stone and read aloud the names of every orphan who had found a home during her reign. Arya stayed for a time, then set out again. Her promise to return now made good each year. When the snow melted and the crocuses rose, she brought stories of distant islands, of trade routes opened by Sansa's laws, of wildlings who had built their own council in the north and chosen a woman as their chief. She hunted in the God's Wood with Benjen's children, teaching them to track, to listen, to respect the old ways and the new. The realm thrived. Harvests were good more years than not. Famine, when it came, was met with swift relief. Plagues were rare, And when they came, the network of healers and maesters trained during Sansa's reign curbed their worst excesses. Justice, imperfect as always, was swifter and more certain. In distant Dorne, Mara's daughter inherited the sun and spear, her claim uncontested. In the Vale, Lady Royce's granddaughter presided over a court that included guildsmen and shepherds as well as knights. In the north, the Mormonts and the Wildling chiefs met in open council each year, their treaties written in plain words, their stories preserved by Samwell's growing cadre of scholars. The White Quills traveled farther still, crossing the narrow sea to Bravos and Pentos, sharing Sansa's legacy. Plain justice, open markets, the dignity of the low and the high alike. Some laughed at their simplicity, but many listened, and a few cities took the lessons to heart. On Sotherios, it was said, a queen once read a copy of Sansa's law and began to free her slaves. It was not a realm without darkness. There were years when the reigns failed, when bandit lords rose, when ambitious men and women plotted from the shadows. Yet always, the memory of the queen who listened held power, not as fear, but as an unspoken challenge. When lords sought to hoard grain, it was the people who stopped them. When judges grew corrupt, the small folk wrote petitions to Benjen or Arya or the White Quills, and justice was not long denied. Years spun onward, and Sansa's legacy grew not as a monument, but as a living garden. Each spring, the crocuses returned, sometimes so thick in the gardens and along the roadsides that the city itself seemed to wear a purple cloak. On the first day of the bloom, children, rich and poor, orphan and lord, brought flowers to her stone, laying them in silence or with songs, telling her story anew. And so, with the slow certainty of the seasons, the world Sansa built endured. Through grief and joy, trial and triumph, ordinary days and rare wonders, the city she saved was not perfect, nor ever free of sorrow, but it was kinder, steadier, more just. In every corner, in every life shaped by her choices, the promise of her reign survived. That mercy could be taught, that justice was listening, and that hope, once planted, would outlast even the longest winter. Benjen grew old in his turn, and when he felt his years weighing heavy, he walked the garden with Arya and his grandchildren, telling them of the queen who had loved them first. The White Quills wrote new books, the archives overflowed, and the story of Sansa the Just, the Queen of Crocuses, was never lost, never forgot. Her stone in the garden weathered and faded, but the crocuses never failed to bloom, and the people who gathered there each spring always left with pockets full of seeds, ready to plant hope wherever they went. So it was that the dream Sansa once held, fragile, impossible, shaped by pain and memory, became the steady heartbeat of the realm. And the world, for all its old shadows, was brighter because she had lived and loved and listened.